All right, so I am here with Frebr33ze. We made a joke on stream about doing a Ravenswatch balancing podcast, but here we are with an actual video. We have a bunch of information for you guys to go over. We're probably going to split this up into either 2 to 4 videos. We're going to ping pong channels, so it's going to start on my channel, and then the next conversation is going to be over on Frebr33ze's channel. So make sure to head over there and subscribe to his channel and look at his content because he has amazing content covering this game.
Yo,
And yeah, there he is. There he is.
hey, selling out. Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
So,
I think you're pretty cool too. So
oh, I appreciate that.
yeah, I'll put
Uh,
that energy out there.
Frebr33ze made this phenomenal list, this document that we're going to go over. And this first part of it, we're going to talk about magical objects and builds, and basically the balance and economy, or no, the balance of the game, and just different magical objects and how we think they're working right now, what should be tuned up, what should be adjusted. And the first one we have in like best builds and the first starting point to talk about is the economy build. And
Yeah, that's it's pretty intense right now. I think you'll see this in almost every build. And like whenever I'm doing gameplay videos, I'm pretty much always going to try to prioritize Leprechaun Coin, and I'm trying to lean away from Golden Egg and Hope Diamond, which I feel like are the other real big players in this build. But it feels kind of bad because I know that there's so much free value on the table if I just pick all of these together. And I see that too in your videos. Like if you want to guarantee a build, you usually start with the Leprechaun Coin.
mhm. And so if you're not super familiar, the reason why this is the best build in the game is having a lot of money right now in this game is really good for multiple reasons. You can buy all your wishing wells, you can upgrade your talents in the shop and buy items from the shop, and because Golden Egg scales off of how much money you spend in a run. So if you have a full stack of Leprechaun coin, you get a free choice on your first reroll, every reroll, and that's going to make you a lot of money. It also gives you rerolls, which gives you money. And then yeah, Egg does more damage based off the money you spend. Its super effect is also more dream shards when you complete it. And then Hope Diamond just helps enable more damage coming from Egg, basically enables all your talents being fully upgraded, enables you to buy every shop and every wishing well. That's really strong. That's really strong in a game, especially when super effects are so strong, and being able to buy everything like major shaping, minor shaping, grandiose shaping, and getting more opportunities from the wishing well is really strong. I think we have another part of this economy build being Atomic Tobacco, which I think just helps you guarantee your builds. And being able to guarantee your build in this game is really good. Like having enough rerolls to basically curate your magical objects and talents is really beneficial. And then the only other thing we had here was Horn of Plenty, because you can also get some rerolls out of that.
Yeah, Horn of Plenty is nice. It kind of complements anything you want to do. Something to call out, I think, with Leprechaun Coin is that if you're going for Hope Diamond, Leprechaun Coin takes some of the challenge of your mechanical execution and making sure that you're not dying by accident, right? That you're not getting caught at death's door and losing all your money. It relieves some of that burden because the Leprechaun Coin will save that money in a sense as rerolls. So if you have a bunch of rerolls and you die and you lose all of your coins, all of your dream shards, the reality is that it's not as big of a setback. And it's probably not a problem that you notice as much, Ace, because you don't die as much. But I think that for it's significant for a lot of players that if you have all those rerolls sitting in your inventory, you don't have that same risk. You know that if you do die, you will get your money back pretty quickly. And yeah, it's just kind of the whole package right now.
Mm.
I'd say, well, how what would you say, like a typical, say that this isn't like, the best case, but by the end of chapter 3, roughly how much value do you think you're getting from each golden egg? Is it probably like 30 to 40 damage?
Yeah, if you can get this set up, I think the average run with Golden Egg, you're probably going to end up with around 30 to 35 damage. I think the higher side is when you push 40. I think the highest that I've got it up to was 52, and that's with a very early Hope Diamond
Yeah.
Leprechaun coin complete in chapter 1, and then start pushing Golden Egg. But I feel like yeah, a lot of the times here you can get 4 golden eggs, get that extra 30% dream shards, and then if you can get more, it is probably beneficial to get more. Sometimes it might be like worth investing into a King of Clubs or something to get the crit chance on your power or something like that. But I think golden eggs, for the most part, like it's tough to open a chest and see a golden egg and re-roll away from it. And I
True.
think that's one of like the big issues with this build and what makes it so tough. One thing I wanted to talk about with rerolls though, and my opinion on rerolls in the game and what does past tech want, because we've seen the discussion in Discord on is there too much like hand holding with getting your build, and should builds be more random? Should your items be more random? And my personal belief on this is before rerolls existed and we only had 2 chapters, I think Past Tech wanted that. But I think with the full release of the game, I think adding a common item that gives you a reroll, I think changing Horn of Plenty to allow to give you potentially 2 rerolls, I think the addition of super effects, meaning that you need to stack items to actually get the super effect. I think Past Tech wants rerolls to exist in the game. I know they nerfed them from Grimoires and how much you actually got, but I do believe they actually want this to exist in the game, and the amount of rerolls that we are getting, I think it's kind of important because I think they like the idea of combining some super effects with each other. And I think if you neuter rerolls and the amount that you get, I think you kind of neuter a lot of the super effect stacking. So
I think this is one of those topics that this is far more defining than a lot of the other items in the game. Like if you look at the other things that we're talking about, they'll affect like specific builds and things that you want to do. But Leprechaun Coin, Horn of Plenty, this eco build is really interesting because it affects the basic gameplay loop so much more than anything else. And to to kind of like be more opinionated, like personal preference, I like the fact that we have control in the game. I think it's really cool that you have some idea of what you want to do and you narrow towards it. And if you look at other roguelikes, Risk of Rain 2 and Hades, there are things that are being done in those games that aren't maybe as explicit as our reroll system, but they do narrow the build potential. Like in Hades, this looks like your first couple boon slots will impact the RNG on your next boons. Like whatever is your offered next will depend on what you're offered first.
mhm,
Ravenswatch is interesting because your items and talents can all come at almost any time, with the exclusion of some things like legendaries and cursed. And obviously the rate that they appear at, the rarity that they appear at, is variable. But in Ravenswatch, your pool of items, all of those items can appear from any chest, and there's a lot more junk in that in terms of like the options that you really want. There's fewer things that you really want all the time, and so I think you either need to have a really robust reroll system to allow people to still have some control, because it's not going to be fun if you have 5 different commons in your inventory and no super effects off of any of them. We want people to be able to experience super effects. They're in the game because they're interesting, but we also don't want the game to revolve around one particular item too much. And that item right now is Leprechaun Coin.
yeah, yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think we had talked about something at one point, just like loosely brought it up. I don't know how much this would actually change the game. It might not do anything, but we had talked about taking Leprechaun Coin's super effect, rerolling a choice for the first time is free, and switching that with Tommy Tobacco and making Tommy
Yeah.
Tobacco do that, and taking the super effect of Tommy Tobacco, get 1 extra choice when obtaining magical objects, and putting that on Leprechaun Coin. And I think where the benefit of that exists is Tommy Tobacco can probably still keep the 2 stars of fate, but having Tommy Tobacco give you 4 choices only affects your magical objects like your wishing wells or your chests. Where if you switch that effect, Tommy Tobacco can now affect your chest and your grimoires and stuff, but it can also affect your talents and when you level up. So Tommy Tobacco would be the thing that you do get for rerolls for your general build overall because it helps with that. Again, I still think the play and to be optimal would still be stack Leprechaun Coin, but I think it would just be really interesting seeing if that changed the game and how important Leprechaun Coin was, because I think it would. Tommy Tobacco is already in my mind, an instant take if I see it, but
So good.
I think it would still be an instant take if I saw it that way, and I think I would almost get more value out of Tommy Tobacco, um, and a little bit less out of Leprechaun Coin from that super effect because it's so important to get to the Leprechaun Coin super effect right now. Where I don't know. I think that would be a very, very minor change that would do very, very little to balance out Leprechaun Coin, but it could potentially change up the game. Um, I think they still. I don't actually have a full opinion on what I think they need to do to Leprechaun Coin to not have it be super like overtuned, but that
Yeah.
would just be an interesting thing for me to see and like what does it do to the game now?
Yeah, and we're going a little bit longer on this one because I think the Leprechaun coin is probably the single most important item to talk about. And so I to continue to build off of that, right? And the thing with Leprechaun coin is right now it gives 15 dream shards per reroll, and that scales as you stack up more and more of them. Um, that is always going to be hard to balance when you have the golden egg and when you have Hope Diamond in the game. I think that making tying dream shards to rerolls is probably not the way that I would want to see this go forward. I think honestly, if it was it one thing I think would be cool is if you really take Leprechaun Coin out as it stands, put that super effect somewhere in the game, because I think that super effect is actually really interesting. Tamadabako is a great place for it. And if that makes Tamadabako too strong, maybe take the rerolls off Tamadabako, and then it's fine, right? You can do a couple things to play with that a little bit. Then you have Horn of Plenty to give you rerolls, and I think that's an item that I think is going to be easier to balance around, and it's going to not lend itself to the same problems as Leprechaun Coin. And then potentially, what if you made it so that dreams in the shop, like shapings in the shop, you could actually target them, so you could use that to guarantee a super effect in some situations. That's a more comprehensive change. That's a lot of different things that have to line up. I would prefer to see the game economy and rerolls divorced. I don't know that tying those systems together is really healthy. And I think that Leprechaun Coin, the way the numbers work right now, like a lot of the time you can take an item, you can say just adjust this up or down, and it'll be fine. The reality is the Leprechaun Coin is either going to be terrible or it's going to be fantastic, right? If it's a lower number, if it's like 5 dream shards, it is going to be an awful item 90% of the time. But in the situation where you have your golden egg and you have your Hope Diamond, all of a sudden it becomes relevant and potentially overpowered again. So that, I don't know. I think Leprechaun Coin is currently needed to help us build towards things that are really interesting and synergistic. And we need something else that will fill that role that is not connected to the game economy. And then if you do something to Leprechaun Coin, I think Golden Egg and Hope Diamond may just be okay. We would need time to watch those. I think Hope Diamond in particular, I don't have as many complaints about it anymore.
Same. I think the one thing I wanted to go off where you said tying rerolls to economy or to your dream shards. When the choice out of a red grimoire is to reroll away from dream shards back
Yeah.
into rerolls to get more money, I think that's where it is a bit of an issue, which is kind of funny to me.
Oh, and like the times when you go to a red chest and you're offered, I don't know, like a thunderstone and a flaming pearl, and you're like, oh, but I also could pick up a leprechaun coin, and it's better idea to take the common than it is to take the epic. Like leprechaun coin is too wacky. Like I think we need to get away from that. But but I think that the idea of having rerolls and having RNG control, like something like this should exist.
Mhm.
Having having rerolls be the thing that controls the RNG. Again, having targeted minor shaping, major shaping, making those things where that they're a little bit more autonomy. The good thing about this, and the good thing about rerolls, is that it means that players with skill have a place to express that. You know, the more experience you have in the game, the more things that you can set up. So rerolls are good for us as a player base because of what they enable us to do and the growth that you see in yourself as you understand characters and items better. I think that rerolls help enable this, and if you can put that control in rerolls, that's good. If you're able to spread it out into other systems so that it's not as just reroll centric, I also like that. And if we want to add items and we want to add talents to the game, if we want to increase the number of options you have, like when you are selecting a talent, when you're selecting an item, I think that's all on the table. I like all of those, but I think Leprechaun Coin right now isn't. Yeah, it's too much.
Yeah, and Leprechaun Coin and Tommy Tobacco were actually buffed when they did the reroll protection. So you can no longer reroll into a thing that you had. There's now so
True.
much more value in that when you go to a wishing well and you're targeting a specific rare, not seeing it with Leprechaun Coin and Tommy Tobacco, you're very close to guaranteeing that if you reroll, you're going to see what you want.
Yeah, wells are really an interesting thing for the game right now. It's something I didn't really anticipate when I read the patch notes, honestly, and it's been, and I don't think it's bad. I don't think reroll protection is bad either. I think that was actually really good
Mm.
because rerolling the same items is like a nightmare, like new player experience. So I think that like leave those alone. But like let's look at this one.
Having Horde and Giant Rats and playing Pied Piper and rerolling twice and seeing Horde and Giant Rats on both rerolls is something that I will never forget.
No, never. Honestly,
um,
I don't know. How would you feel if every time you rerolled, it like remembered your previous rerolls, and so you would be narrowing that pool? Is that too strong? Like if we reduce the number of reroll, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of things that could be connected to that, but uh, maybe that's beyond the scope of this conversation.
yeah, potentially that might be a lot. The next thing that we want to talk about was like the next just general best build in the game. Because yeah, economy build is the best. The next and probably one of the most fun ways to play the game right now is the dash build.
Oh
So
yeah,
The core of that is going to exist with Eternal Rose, because after a dash, you gain 10% crit chance for 2 seconds. If you have multiple dashes, you don't just cap out at that 10%. You go from 10% and you dash again, you're now at 20%. So this gets really, really, you can stack your crit chance really, really easily with this. And then as Frebr33ze has taught us, any crit chance over 100% gets added to your crit damage. There's a lot of ways to get really good crit chance in this game. And so you have the availability to just stack crit damage in a lot of these dash builds, and you don't need to even pay attention to your crit chance because it's going to be above 100.
Yeah.
Other things in this are going to be your dash talents, then it's going to be Charm Stone, your Raven Wing, and then there's just certain things of flair that might be beneficial, like 7 League Boots. I think this is actually very character dependent, because sometimes an animation to, like, if you dash, do an attack, and then you want to reset your dash, some animation might be almost as long as just your regular dash cooldown. So I think there's some characters where 7 League Boots is really beneficial. And then we just have, what is it? We have Swan Cloak and Witch's Broom as well in this.
Oh yeah, Witch's Broom is important there too.
And I guess Vajra. Vajra can be important on certain characters like Beowulf. I think it's really important.
Honestly, Vajra's better. I'm sorry, hopping in here. Vajra's better than I thought it was because it doesn't scale off of your level scaling. So that's one of the reasons that it's not as good as it used to be in the past. But because it does benefit from your base damage, if you can get a lot of stacks of Vajras, it kind of stays relevant. That was one of the things that I thought was really interesting when I did my rocket science build recently. I was like, oh, this is actually hanging in here pretty well.
I think one of the best things Vajra also does as well is it's pretty decent stagger. Like a lot of times if
Oh,
you're hitting an
huge.
enemy with, especially if you are Geppetto, where you now get 2 sources of damage on your dash, because the thing is, most dash talents don't happen on the dash. It's an attack after the dash, where Geppetto's is on the dash. You get 2 sources of damage, and that's like 2 sources of damage that can crit, that can benefit from crit chance and stuff. So I think that's really cool. It's 2 sources that can now be stacked with Eternal Rose, which I think is cool, especially with Geppetto. But I think the reason dash builds are so potent is you take 3 Charm Stones and you have Eternal Rose complete, and you have that 50% crit chance, and you have 50% crit damage. And then say you have a talent that gives you extra crit chance, say Beowulf Blazing Runes. If you have that at legendary, that's 70% crit chance on an ignited enemy. 1 dash from Eternal Rose is putting you over that. You know, you're at 75. If you have the 5 stack, you're now at 125%. That's 25% from Eternal Rose's crit chance being applied to damage. And then you have the 50% from the super effect. If you dash again, that's another 50% crit damage from Eternal Rose being applied on all your dash attacks. So I think that's why dash is so strong right now. And there's just like dash abilities or talents just in general are really good talents.
Yeah.
Frebr33ze just put out a video on that, so go check that out.
Yeah, like just always take double strike whenever you see it, and I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. I guess the other thing though to know about dash builds is that they are mechanically a little bit more intense. So although they're very, very good, I don't know that they're always the most accessible. So if you're playing, for example, for a double strike build on Scarlet, you dance out, you land your attack animation, and then you don't have your dash. And I think that can be punishing for new players. Another thing is that because you're prioritizing the Eternal Rose, there are some things in terms you're not going to have the same things that you would have with Leprechaun Coin or Horn of Plenty. You're not going to have a bunch of green armor stacks. So I think that your survivability can be a little bit tricky to manage sometimes with the dash build. I've had this experience a time or two where that I'm in a dash build and it's pretty cool, but I get to chapter 3 and I haven't been hit in a while, and then something hits me and I just evaporate. So I think that dash builds, you need to be cognizant in chapters 2 and 3 that, okay, it's time to take a little bit of armor. It's time, especially if you have like a stack of Eternal Roses, because at that point, green armor is just free real estate. Green armor is one of the best items in the game as you go late and you don't know that you can guarantee the super effect. The base effect, when you already have commons in your pool, is pretty dang solid.
Mm. No,
But I think
100%.
that but yeah, I think that that's a challenge with the dash build. Is it is a little more punishing if you're a newer player, and it is more demanding. But like the ceiling of it is actually higher than the eco build. Most builds are going to be somewhat of a hybrid between these, by the way. So the dash build, to get to it, you might have already built a Leprechaun Coin stack just so that you could control the RNG and get the rest of the things you wanted.
Mm. And just to quickly go over, I wanted to talk about dash builds in general. Scarlet has an amazing one with Double Strike and Vanna Spikes. Beowulf has a good one with Fireball and Fiery Slash. Aladdin
Fiery
just has
Slash,
Leaping
yeah.
Strikes, but Leaping Strikes is such a good talent. Wukong's kind of weird because he has a dash that Well, he has spinning strikes, but you're normally thinking about sprint and stacking Vajra. And then Geppetto obviously has one, but one dash build that I think is amazing, especially because of, and this is for me the premier 7 league boots dash build. I think 7 league boots isn't super important because most dash talents are linked to the attack, which 7 league boots isn't reset on attack, it's reset on your power, special, or defense. There's one of them that uses a power. You have Pied Piper's power spinning solo that you don't need to stack dash cooldown or dash charges. You can just focus Eternal Rose and then focus power charges. As many power charges as you have is as many dashes as you have. And Pied Piper benefits from spinning solo with the crit chance on it, so it gets to stack with Eternal Rose. But he's also one of the only characters that gets to stack a bunch of things to his power. So he has like Sniper, he has extra measure and quintuplets, and then even a little bit of music of the spheres in a way to stack all of this damage into one really, really powerful dash attack. That is one of my favorite builds in the game because it is so much damage just like right off the bat. Like if you play a dash build, I think you are enjoying the game the most. I agree with what you're saying where dash builds can be kind of punishing because you are using one of your tools to escape now as offense. When you have a dash build going, it is one of the most fun ways to play the game. You feel like you're zipping around the map. You feel like, I don't know, it feels like a different type of game. It doesn't really feel like Ravenswatch as much. It feels, again, more like a Hades type game.
Yeah, you're
Because of the
flying,
speed of
man.
it. Yeah.
Well, that's one of the interesting things coming to Ravenswatch is that your dash is on a 2-second cooldown, and it doesn't have an iframe cooked into it. So your dashes are a resource you have to manage a lot more carefully. But in a dash build, once you get enough Raven Wings and you have some Charm Stones, you're really quite independent in that aspect of your gameplay. Also, Charm Stone gives you shield, and shield is an interesting thing. Like when you have the full stack, so there are things, and Swan Cloak. Swan Cloak is one of those items that I didn't think very highly of, and as I've played more with it, it's a pretty cool item. I don't think it actually scales off of Mermaid Tears, but it's such a it's such a great tool to enhance this build. So as you go kind of later, I think the dash build early has some vulnerable windows, but if you are aware of that and you go for a couple of these dash synergies as you trend towards the later part of the game, I think you actually start getting pretty safe again.
And Swan Cloak, if you are doing a dash build, it does really mitigate so much damage. It's not as noticeable, but if you're... Swan Cloak and Witch's Broom are interesting items because if you take them without a dash build, you now really have to think about your dash and when you're using it, and you have to be a lot more intentional with your dash in the timing of it. But I think just in a dash build where you're dashing so much that you don't need to think about it, it's very good. It's going to keep you alive. And then Witch's Broom. Some builds, Witch's Broom will just make you invincible, depending on how many dashes you have. Again, like the Wukong and Geppetto builds, you're kind of invincible. Like if you can dash across a group of enemies and just make sure you end in a safe spot and then turn around and do it again, you're invincible pretty much the entire run, which is pretty funny.
I honestly wish that I could just start a bunch of games with Witch's Broom because Witch's Broom is one that you have to rethink when you're playing with it, and you don't generally want to pick it up in most builds. I don't have as much mechanical practice with it, but basically, it's going to give you that iframe on your dash that you would have in a game like Hades. And so I imagine if we were more used to it, it would be to pick up more often. But
Mhm.
because we don't pick it up very often, our brains aren't wired to think about it. So I think Witch's Broom is one of those. If I was at the theoretical maximum of what a Ravenswatch player could and should be, then I would probably prioritize it a lot more.
Yeah, yeah. I also think if you're a console player and you haven't played this game yet and you're playing a lot of Curse of the Dead Gods right now to play a past that game, this is how you're intangible in that game, unless you're using a shield and you're parrying. So you might just want to pick this up right away and use this and get used to it, and that might be really beneficial right off the start.
Yeah, that's really cool. One other thing on Charmstone Shield, by the way, is it does scale with hero level, and Shield scales better than health. So if you go up a level, you get 10% of your health, right? And that stacks. But what's cool with Shield is you actually get 15%. So Charmstone Shield is one of those things that I haven't done a whole lot with, but as I look at it and I look at the numbers, I'm like, there's some potential here. There could be something cool.
Don't you also get the your whatever your armor value is added on the shield, don't you? Like it reduces.
I think so. I can't swear to that one, but you don't get staggered too. That's one of the interesting things about shield is if you get hit by a stagger and it doesn't break your shield, I don't think it staggers you.
Oh, I actually have not noticed that. I know that I've had an Aladdin run with aerial catch where I have shield as I land in that, and I had a full thing of mermaid tier, so I had a big shield, but I had a lot of armor, and I would dive into a group of enemies, and I know I was taking a bunch of damage, and that shield would still be on me. So I do believe it does stack with armor as well, which is really cool if you are going the dash build and you manage to get like a couple of green armors or just take armor from a grimoire.
Yeah, and I guess I can't swear to the not getting staggered thing, but I do know that like it doesn't register as taking damage when something hits your shield. Like you don't get the little blip or whatever. So yeah, I think shield is one of those things that we're going to need to play more and experience more. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun for the community to figure it out,
Hmm.
especially now that it's buffed a little bit.
Hmm. The next thing we want to talk about, which stays with Eternal Rose a little bit, but it's just the idea of crit builds. And I love the new Horn of Plenty because you can get crit chance and crit damage out of that. And prior to this, your only availability for crit chance and crit damage was Grimoires and Eternal Rose, and then the super effects from King of Clubs and Jack of Diamonds. I don't believe there's any other crit chance or damage in the game, but Horn of Plenty being able to get a whole bunch of crit from that. And then Eternal Rose, like in some builds, say like a Pied Piper rat build, and you have stimulant vibes and all your rats are attacking, rats now get the benefit from crit. You can just be at a distance and dash. All your rats are now just hitting that much harder, are all critting. So there's a lot of viability just in crit builds. I and where my mind goes to that, especially with Eternal Rose, is builds like Pied Piper's rat build where you don't need to be manually doing something as much, where damage can kind of just be happening. Again, like a Pied Piper course low notes build, place one of those, go dash away from it. Those notes now have greater chances to crit. So I think Eternal Rose exists in a lot of builds, or can exist in a lot of builds that aren't just dash builds. I think you look at that and you read that and go, oh, I'm only going to take that in a dash setting. But no, there's a lot of builds that can still benefit from this.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting. Honestly, one of the reasons why that Leprechaun coin rubs me the wrong way sometimes is because it incentivizes us to prioritize rerolls a ton. And like I was I think an early adopter of crit builds and trying to figure out how that worked. And some of my favorite things to do in the game revolve around Pyromania, Scarlet, those kinds of really big crit instances. And because reroll economy is so good, it feels bad to build those builds that I love so much.
Hmm.
But like the thing is, all the tools are there, so we can. And if you had great RNG, I think that the crit build is probably, if not the highest ceiling, it's one of the highest ceilings. The dash build is so cool. It's hard to say that that's not the best, but the crit build in terms of what we have, because we have wells where we're going to get offered consumables. We have and like a common. And usually you can control that pretty well to build up your common stacks. You have Hornet Plenty that you can use to get crit. The Grimoires have crit. Like if rerolls weren't such a high priority right now, we would see a lot of really cool and interesting crit builds. We see a lot more of them in the game, and I think they're awesome. So I'm a big simp for the just traditional. Like I load up my Pyromania. I have 30% base crit, and so now I'm just going to go all in on my extra crit damage. I love those, and I think that we should get to play more of them.
Oh yeah, one of my favorite crit builds is taking a bunch of Eternal Rose and having like at least two dash charges, but it is with Carmilla. At nighttime, she gains that 30% crit chance, and she has Go for the Throat, which is 70% crit chance on a special. If you hit it from max range, that's already 100% if you're at nighttime. I dash before you use the special, and then hit an enemy, and then if you also have Injection, which places a power in an enemy, and you have Flesh Rip, which power has a 40% crit chance on bleeding enemies, and you have Sadism, which is crits deal more damage on bleeding enemies, and you dash away, you can now have the crit from your special hit, and then the crit from the injection hit an enemy again, and it's kind of insane damage when you're pulling that off, especially with a completed Eternal Rose. That's like one of my favorite crit builds in the game that uses
It's
Eternal
beautiful.
Rose. But yeah, it's not a dash, it's not like no dash talents involved. It's just Eternal Rose enabling two different sources of crit.
And we like that. We like a little bit of hybrid in our builds. It keeps things fresh. It keeps things interesting. I I love crit builds. I love crit concepts, and I think that I think that we should make sure that those stay in the game and they're still really strong. I don't have any problems with the things like I'm looking like we talked a lot about the eco build and some of the things that maybe should be tweaked. I don't really have that feedback for crit. I don't know. Do you?
No, no, I don't either because again, you don't have all the rerolls and all the money when you are going to crit build. For the most part, you are sacrificing. You're picking up an Eternal Rose over a Leprechaun coin. You're for the most part foregoing potentially like a Baler's Eye by not picking up a charge or a cooldown with Raven Wing or Charmstone. You're foregoing, you know, uh, Tommy Tobacco potentially or Vorpal Blade for Swan Cloak. And I mean, if you want to go Witch's Broom, you're probably not forgoing Hope Diamond or
Yeah,
Hungry Grass. You're probably
probably
taking those.
not.
But uh, and depending on who you are, if you're Geppetto or if you're Wukong and you want to do this crit like dash crit build or something, you're foregoing a golden egg for a Vajra or something like that. So I just think, and then especially if you're doing a crit build that involves the Jack of Diamonds or King of Clubs and you need that 40% crit chance, you're foregoing a golden egg. So it's like, I don't have an issue with this because to get it working for the most part, you're avoiding the best things in the game, like the easiest access to your builds, the easiest access to everything to get these to work. And I don't want those type of builds to be punished either because again, we already talked about you're getting rid of one of your defensive abilities in a dash for the most part to make it offensive. So you're already putting yourself in a bit more risk. And the reward for that is normally you're having a build that can it's what you said earlier, you kind of end up as a glass cannon. Sometimes you'll just obliterate chapter 1 and 2 and then you're like, all right, this build's going insane, and then you get hit by a knight in chapter 3 and you're dead. So there's a little bit of trade-off there, and I think those builds are pretty okay. I will admit there's some builds that are unbalanced, but in general, they're
Yeah.
pretty balanced.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is that's probably something that once the eco build has gone down in priority, we'll probably, some of these things will be like, okay, maybe it's time to take a look at this or that. And I'm not saying specific things because I don't want those things to be looked at yet. But yeah, no, I really like crit. I like the variety. I think that there's a lot of interesting ways, and I think that there's interesting decisions because as you're talking about your process, like you're going to chess, you're thinking about what you're going to take. There are common, rare, and epic. There all these. Honestly, I guess that there's not a whole lot of legendary items that play into that decision as much, but like there's so many decisions that you're going to be making, and you're going to have to make them based on your game knowledge. That is skill expression. That is variety. That's what makes roguelikes work. And so I think that crit builds add a lot of that. They have a lot of those good marks of something that works well and makes the game spicy. I'm a huge proponent. Let's leave those crits. Let's make those crits good. Yeah, huge fan.
So the next thing we wanted to talk about, which is it's the armor build and
The
the idea
armor,
of
yeah,
armor in the game. And we have our sources of armor are green armor. We have Dragonhide. We have the Raven Skull super effect. And then other things that we can do with this are Bloody Mary's Mirror and Grimoires. And I guess a little bit of Horn of Plenty.
yeah. I mean, it also technically fast walker boots, right? If you have enough armor, then fast walker boots becomes a no-brainer to take. But it's not. It's generally not a core thing that you're going to do often.
Mhm. So I think one of the reasons why armor builds, and especially going green armor and Dragonhide, isn't as popular as the other builds is because it's not as immediately. You don't see the benefits of it as immediately. Like getting one green armor as your first magical object, you're not really seeing it do anything. Getting honestly Dragonhide, if you have Dragonhide and no armor, you're for the most part not seeing it do a whole lot because again, you have no armor until you are hit. But the fact that green armor's super effect is rare objects also count for green armor, and that Dragonhide super effect is the 40% of armor becomes damage. I think if you complete green armor, you probably have by the end of chapter 3, you have some other common magical objects, and you probably have Dragonhide, and then whatever damage direction that you're looking to stack, whether it be Egg, Ace of Spades, the special, or Power, you're going to be sitting in my games. Normally, I'm sitting around like 200 to 300 armor just based off that, and that's like instant. You don't die. Like you gotta be trying a little bit to die there. In my mind, you can still die, but like I don't know the amount of damage that you're just getting from that. Again, if you have 300 armor and you're getting 40% of that, you're sitting at a good amount of damage. What is that? That's 120.
120, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
120. So it's like that's 120. I mean, most runs you don't really need more than 120 damage. You can, but it's you can now start looking at crit from grimoires and stuff like that. Yeah, anything you wanna talk about there?
Oh man, I think that those are a lot of the high notes and I think that Bloody Mary's Mirror is a cool item that we don't do a whole lot with. And I think that armor builds in general, like they start slow, but if you go into a Baba Yaga fight and you have a lot of armor, it becomes so much easier because if you make a mistake, you can't be punished. It's so hard to actually die once you have a good armor build going. It's hard to start. It's probably going to look like a hybrid build most of the time. You're probably going to start in a dash build or something. You'll have an opportunity to switch into armor and then you'll pick it up. But another thing that's really cool about armor is it's going to synergize well with healing. So if you have mermaid tears, if you have an ability that gives you some healing natively in your kit, Holy Grail, Swan Cloak, these things are going to increase the validity of armor. Another cool thing about armor is you go up in difficulty and maybe healing gets rare. You take disease and a challenge as a challenge modifier. Armor prevents damage from being done. So it's a little bit cooler than vitality because if you have a big vitality build and you're in a challenge run, recovering that health can be really challenging. But armor, it prevents it from being done, so there isn't a recovery. So although the effect of a stack of armor and of a stack of vitality is fairly similar in terms of the average survivability across the entire life of your character, the entire HP pool of your character, even though that's fairly similar, the effect in terms of your sustain and your ability to go from camp to camp and not have to take breaks to find some other way to get your health pool restored is a thing about armor that is really cool and really strong. I think that armor could be one of those things that could become broken. Right now, it doesn't feel that way. The start's really bad, but it is so, your character can be so oppressive in those boss fights and in those late game scenarios when you have enough armor.
And I think one thing with Bloody Mary's Mirror, if you have the green armor stack and you have the Dragonhide stack and you're sitting at that, say 250 armor, and then you have, just some good amount of damage as well, that's over 100. If you take Bloody Mary's Mirror, or like taking Bloody Mary's Mirror is almost always worth it then, because you're going to get that extra damage and you're still going to have more than enough armor to have probably close to like 50% or over that damage resistance. So, I mean,
Yeah.
there's no reason to ever have 300 armor in the game. If you have that and you have a good damage, go ahead and take Bloody Mary's Mirror. I think the other cool thing with Bloody Mary's Mirror is the amount of damage that you get from a Grimoire if you take damage is relatively low. The amount of armor that you take is relatively high. If you take Bloody Mary's Mirror early on and you just want to focus armor out of Grimoires to get your damage, you're getting a lot more from that investment. That is very, very niche. Like you have to intentionally be doing that. You got to know what you're doing if you're doing that, because you also will want a source of damage then to balance out and find your armor. But I do think there's cool cases for armor to be made, and especially with what Frebr33ze was saying about challenge runs. If you guys have seen any of the challenge runs I've been doing recently, either having armor and good healing is super vital, or having something like Golden Coat, which is a different form, I guess, of armor. It's not armor, but in a way it is. But yeah, armor builds are, if you get it working, it's probably the best build in the game, survivability wise and damage wise. Like it balances both. Where something like a golden egg build, you might not have nearly as much armor or vitality, but you have an insane amount of damage and insane amount of crit chance.
Yeah, it kind of does everything. And we don't see it as much because, again, it's competing, the build is competing with the reroll economy build. So prioritizing rerolls out of Grimoires, prioritizing leprechaun coins, these kind of things take away from what this build could be. But you know, if I see a future, there is a potentially a problem once it really gets going. It's like, is this too much? Is it too much to just be able to laugh at Baba Yaga in the final fight? I think that armor has more of an ability to create those uncomfortable situations, but right now the buildup is so challenging. I guess that my philosophy is that a build being able to be broken is not a bad sign for the balanced health of the game if the hurdle to get there is sufficiently high. And I feel like the hurdle right now is sufficiently high.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You're doing a lot of commitment for items that are not going to see a lot of payoff until Dragonhide's complete, and you're not guaranteed that. I've had plenty of runs that I've sat at 3 Dragonhide when I have, you know, 180 armor, and I'm like, please give me some damage. And if it doesn't
Yeah.
work, it doesn't work. So
Yeah, Dragonhide is such a cool item. The super effect, I mean, the super effect is so cool. The base effect is like, it's cool, it's interesting, but it can be, I've had that same thing. Getting stuck at 3 stacks of Dragonhide is one of those things where it's like, I kind of wish that, we were handling the rerolls and the RNG a little bit so that that didn't happen as often. But of course, we've already talked about that. Anything else you want to say on the armor build?
no, I think that's it for the most part. The next build that we had to talk about is the fall of the vitality build.
F's in the chat, people.
F's in the
This
chat for the
is this
vitality
is
build.
over. Remember old Horn of Plenty?
Remember,
Those were the
yeah,
days.
remember what this did? Horn of Plenty with Overblood. Remember
Oh
sitting.
man.
The thing is, the old vitality build is essentially the armor build that we just talked about, but with vitality, where you have so much vitality that you're not going to die, and you have so much damage because of Overblood that you're going to kill everything before you have a chance to die. Um, Now what we have is Ogreblood doing 1 damage for each 10 vitality you have. Where do you get vitality from the game? You have 15 healing fountains, so you have a potential for 15 on your Ogreblood. What else do you have? We have the super effect from Mermaid Tears, which is almost never worth fully completing. Like, having 5 Mermaid Tears is...
That's such a weird decision. And imagine that's another thing I think about is that the Ogre's Blood is going to compete with the Mermaid Tears. Like those things, you don't just get a guarantee to two common stacks. How often do you feel like you complete 2 common stacks? I feel like that's a fairly unlikely thing for me to have happen unless I'm running Master Thief.
Yeah, Master Thief, or if I feel like the only way I'm able to do that is if in chapter one I complete a leprechaun coin full stack, then I feel like
Yeah,
I have a chance for it. It really depends on if you have uh like major shaping, or I mean minor shaping or rapid shaping early, and you can hit what you want with it. But yeah, so that's a huge thing. You're probably never getting that. That 30 vitality for Mermaid Tears is probably the least taken super effect in the game, I'd have to imagine. Besides
yeah.
objects that aren't taken like Voodoo Doll.
I don't have an unlocked on Nightmare. I'm like looking at it right now in my items, and it's so underwhelming. I think okay, yeah. I think in terms of super effects, Mermaid Tears is a candidate. Like, please, this is one where that I would love to see something more interesting. But it's tricky because Mermaid Tears is always going to be one of those items that you take safely, kind of like green armor.
Mhm.
So anyway, it has multiple reasons why it doesn't really work. But you have that. You have vitality that comes from Water of Life. You have Philosopher's Stone, which is actually a pretty darn good source of vitality. But the opportunity cost of taking some of these, like Water of Life, is one of those items that is kind of good, but kind of like, do you really take that? Like, if you have if you're looking at a Vorpal sword blade or an Excalibur, it feels weird to take.
Water Life is one of the things that I'll only take in chapter 3 if I already have the enough ogre blood that I think that that's worth it. It's something that I avoid a lot. Similarly is Cauldron. Cauldron is another way to get vitality.
Yeah,
If I don't have a bunch of ogre blood, then I normally am not looking at Cauldron. Um, our other way of getting vitality is from Grimoires, which you actually get a pretty good chunk of vitality from those. And then Horn of Plenty. Horn of Plenty feels kind of bad to take vitality out of though when you
yeah.
have your crit and your rerolls and stuff from that. Philosopher's Stone is not working, or it works properly, which Hungry Grass is the thing that isn't working properly, where you can get that retroactively. If Philosopher's Stone worked retroactively, I would probably take this so much more often, and I I understand why it can't, because actually Hungry Grass has the negative of you lose your stacks at test store. So I understand why that can't be the case for Philosopher's Stone. But Philosopher's Stone, if you can get that chapter 1 or early chapter 2, and you are going the Vitality Ogre Blood build, I feel like I feel like in my mind, I normally get around, if it's chapter 1, 70 to 130. Like,
Mm,
that's a pretty big range.
that's good.
But I
I
feel
mean,
like I'm
it's
getting
like,
something like
yeah,
that. And if you can get, just say on average, 100 vitality from Philosopher's Stone, that's 10 damage on every Overblood you have. That's going to be less than Golden Egg, but I mean, it's, you're doing something different. You're trying. You also have this huge vitality pool that you're going to be having if you're going for this build. Super effect of Ogre Blood is probably one of the just most like fair and balanced super effects. It's just like here's a flat buff to your crit chance. It's not super inspired or anything, but I do think it does synergize with what you're doing. From the video that you had showed on like how much crit chance you really need before you start stacking crit damage and damage, I feel like if you have no crit chance and you just get a 25 flat buff to it, I feel like that's a pretty good spot to start stacking crit damage as well.
yeah, I like it. I think it's cool too because damage and crit chance are kind of locked in this dance of which one is on top. And usually when one of them starts to scale in your build, you really want the other one. So I like having it here. I think 20% crit chance is just kind of it's a nice thing. I think it's good for the build, and it's synergistic. One thing that's funny though, you mentioned Hungry Grass working retroactively. I saw something in the Discord that almost made it sound like this was intentional, like that they do want it to work that way. Because beforehand, the case to take Hungry Grass is not as good, and it was underpicked, and so making it retroactive is actually making the item a little bit more relevant. And I think that making Philosopher's Stone retroactive too is kind of it makes it where that there would be times when you would pick it up later. It's interesting because you take Hope Diamond, right? Hope Diamond you would never want that in your last mini boss chest in chapter 3.
Hmm.
And there if I don't know, like, do we want these to be more situational, or do we want them to be something that is incentivized to take a little bit later? I think there's a conversation to be had both ways. Uh, but I also think that whatever you decide to do there, it's really important to describe that behavior somehow, because
Hmm.
it's uh, it's 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 undocumented, and that's again a little bit of a barrier if you're trying to get into the game and you don't know why things are doing what they're doing.
I think if they wanted to actually balance, if they wanted to try to make a vitality build seem more appealing, which maybe they don't want to because of the meta of Overblood and Horn of Plenty prior to 1.0. But I do think making Philosopher's Stone retroactive would really, really push me to do that in a lot. I think Also, in like the challenge runs that I'm doing, I would consider Vitality a lot more if Philosopher's Stone could be retroactive. Currently, I think the two candidates of actually taking Ogre Blood and Vitality are Geppetto because of Heart Ties and not wanting your dummies to die in the final chapter, which a lot of times they can just be one shot by Knights, and Heart Ties with a bunch of Vitality can be beneficial. Also, Ogre Blood, the crit chance from that can now apply to your dummies, which is really cool. Dummies can crit. And I think Wukong as well with Thirst for Immortality, where you can have 175 damage. Having each of your Ogre Blood guaranteeing 17 damage is really, really good. And then you just get to stack a whole bunch of stuff on top of that. I think those are currently the two best candidates for doing a Vitality build.
One other thing I think is really cool is that if you have a big vitality pool and you're playing into an armor build, so you have Dragonhide or something, you don't have to heal back up. Like if you keep your health sitting at about 50%, you get so much armor from Dragonhide. So I think that there's kind of a cool incentive to manage your health and kind of keep it in the middle. We might talk about that a little bit later on as well, but I don't know. I think that's an interesting thing to call out. That if you have a lot of vitality, you don't have to play around trying to stay healed.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I kind of wanted to mention, I had an idea for Mermaid Tears for a super effect. Again, I still don't think there'd be a reason to stack this. There would actually be more reason to stack this, but I don't think you need 5 Mermaid Tears. I don't think you need that much healing. Maybe in co-op, but a super effect, and this might be too broken. What if like your odds of finding or getting a healing orb from each enemy killed were less like buffed 5 or 10%?
Ooh. Oh, that's interesting.
Because
Yeah,
that
how does it work now? Is it connected to elite enemies or is it a chance? I've never really thought about it.
I had thought that it was connected to your difficulty. I think elite enemies also do have a higher chance because I notice orbs a lot more from knights than any other enemy. Like knights
Yeah.
almost always seem to drop one. Um, the I can understand that being potentially too much healing, but the area where I really like it is it now lets you go like Mermaid Tears, Philosopher's Stone, Hungry Grass, and focus those for more orbs. And I just think that's really fun. I also think it lets you do Goldilocks Porridge just a little more consistently without having to have the full stack of Goldilocks Porridge for it to work how you want it to work.
Yeah, no, I think that would be an interesting, like I like that effect because it's so different. And as much as like just having a flat statistical boost from a super effect, it's totally fine. Ogre's Blood does it really well. Like, and I would say that I tend to like it in places like Jack of Diamonds and King of Clubs as well. I like these kind of like flat stat boosts in some places, but I think that switching them out with an effect that affects globe spawn rates or something, that's cool because we haven't seen something like it, and it is going to interact interestingly with a lot of these other items, these philosopher's stones, these hungry grasses, and potentially with character kits. I don't know, do we have any kits that do interact with it? Doesn't monkey have like a starting talent that interacts with globes?
It makes it so you can't heal. Like
Oh,
you only heal from your stance or other things that give you health. You can't
well, that's
heal
a
from
negative interaction.
yeah. You can't get orbs and you can't get fountains to heal.
Okay, well, let's scratch that. But yeah, like I like that. I like that because it's an interesting direction that has potential to synergize and inform other talents. The thing about a flat damage boost on a super effect is that it's always going to kind of work, but it's not going to It's not going to guide your build into any particular direction. And I like it more when you're guided in a direction because then your synergies are stronger and there's more expression and interesting combinations. Anyway,
Mm. Right, so moving on, for the most part, that was like the builds you wanted to talk about. Obviously, there's builds like, hey, take a bunch of charges on special power, take power damage, and take Baylor's Eye. I think what we just know from that is it does a lot of damage, and it's really good right now. Um, that we'll potentially talk about Baylor's Eye a little bit more later, but we wanted to just go in and talk about some specific items. And the next one that we have is the Raven's Eye and Ultimate. We'll talk more about ultimates in a different video, specific to characters, but currently Raven's Eye, it reduces ultimate cooldown by 20%, which is fine. I said in my tier list, I normally stay away from this. There's a lot of characters that ultimates aren't really that great. You're normally just better off not using them. And then there's some characters that have really good ultimates, but is it better to build into like special cooldown or power cooldown, the things that you're going to have up way more often than your ultimate? I don't think this 20% needs to be changed, but I'm looking at this super effect. Ultimate clears power, special, and defense cooldowns. How useful, like, is is there ever insane plays? I mean, I guess that lets you take like Nightmare Ichor and Nightmare Thorn and Baylor's Eye and But like,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's so niche. That's like that's not happening. So I would really like a way to get some more ultimate damage from a different source that can scale rather than like your sword icon, your flat damage. Um, because then again, like having something here like 40% more ultimate damage, I think would do so much for certain ultimates.
Yeah, I agree. I think ultimates in general have an impact problem compared to the rest of the character kit. You can do so many things to upgrade your power, your special, your attack, and your ultimate's just kind of there. I think that a lot of the time you either use it for stagger or you don't use it in the fights that matter the most, like in the boss fight. Your ultimate might actually be lower damage over time than just spamming out attacks and mingling in other abilities. The idea of resetting all your cooldowns that's tied behind this. Somebody show me something compelling with this. I don't have fertile feelings in my brain when I look at this. I don't see this and think, oh, I'm going to really like make something cool with this. That's not my personal feeling. I'm sure someone can be creative out there, but if it if it's super super niche, I feel like it would have to be a darn cool build for me to feel like this super effect needs to stick around.
The only area I used this was prior to 1.0 when Baylor's Eye, you had to wait for the cooldown for 7
Right.
charges. This is the only time that I actually used this, but it's also a little counterintuitive to take another epic when you're just trying to stack Baylor's Eye. Um, that's the only area I saw use. I don't see use in it in the game anymore. There's also there's a lot of ultimates that just don't feel like they do enough damage, like Pied Piper's Unchained Melody, Snow Queen's Frost Ray, and stuff like that. Um, that I think in general might need to be looked at prior. Like I don't think giving this a 40% damage buff for a super effect would fix those entirely, but I
No.
think it would do something cool for those that, let me potentially put this on the table. I understand that you kind of want super effects to work with everything, and you have something like, say, Wukong's Transfiguration that I don't think you could give. I don't think it should work with that. I don't think every time you transform into a
Yeah.
character, you have 40%
Might be a little
flat.
busted. Might
Yeah.
be kind of strong.
And like Aladdin's Wish, it would do nothing, but it's like, are you really taking ultimate cooldown on Aladdin's Wish? You know?
Yeah.
Um,
I,
so I would just like that to be, I think in the balancing update, I think this is currently doing nothing for anyone. I think when you finish if you do finish this super effect, I don't think you're even using it intentionally. I think you're just using your ultimate more often.
yeah, and that's another thing is that right now, do you? I would love to see some builds that just revolve around getting the cooldown really low on your ultimate, or taking a Nibelungen ring. By the way, Nibelungen. I think that's actually how you say it. There's a book called like there's a book called the Nibelunglied, and I think that's what comes from. But
Uh,
anyway, like the yeah, it's I would love to see build concepts around trying to break your ultimate. And right now, even if you have everything else going really well in your ultimate, there's very few times where that you want that to be your premier damage dealer. And I the variety would be great. Let's make the ultimate make ultimates great again, you know? Let's
yeah,
let's let's
that's
do
the
that.
quote. That's the quote that
Yeah,
we've been.
exactly. That's what the internet wanted.
I feel like you failed to see the stream the other day where I was Snow Queen and I took Frost Ray and I took 7 ultimate cooldowns and had it on a
Actually,
12-second cooldown.
no, I was watching. I was actually that was what was playing behind my eyes was watching you tickle that boss. I was. It was. The thing is, Baba Yaga was incredibly chunky. Like she's real tough, and so it's not like the damage is non-existent. But you literally put everything you had into this build concept, and it was a little bit underwhelming. Like the effects are cool. I guess apparently though only if you're the one who has it. I understand the effects are a little bit not as good if you're just another player in the lobby. But yeah, I don't know. Like I I would love to walk around as Scarlet and just pull out my shotgun and mess things up, right?
Hmm.
If that was a valid play style to just be, cowboy Scarlet out here collecting bounties, I'm here for it. But right now, that's a stagger. You use that to stagger, and then you go and you do your damage with your abilities that actually do damage. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I feel like as well we used to have our dash, our Charmstone super effect used to be gains another ultimate charge, and then we also had I'm not even gonna try it. We had the ring. Um,
Mhm.
Baylor's Eye used to work with ultimates. I had tried a build with Snow Queen where I had 3 ultimates and I took Baylor's Eye. It was still underwhelming, believe it or not. But
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
we used to have a way, and like I guess just the thing is we used to have a way to actually scale your ultimates a little bit, albeit it was a little weird going 3 dash charges to do that. But I wish we had something there for ultimates. Um, yeah,
We want to
that's
have a section in this thing called ultimate builds. Like that was one of the sections that we wanted to be able to write, and we can't write it because ultimate builds aren't a thing. Like at nightmare difficulty, you go for an ultimate build. I don't know how, like especially with Baba Yaga, because Baba Yaga is just jumping around the map all the time. Even a relatively good ultimate like Mega Puppet, because I feel like Mega Puppet is pretty cool at nightmare with heart ties.
mhm.
Even that is going to have a hard time just trying to chase her down. And also, you're gonna have a hard time getting it out because she's spamming at you when you're in your animation lock.
Yeah, I think we only have one ultimate build in the game currently, and it's Carmilla with Mass Punishment, but you also need Cruel Strikes to make that work. Um, and that's the only ultimate build in the game. And I think that's another thing, just to make a statement on ultimates real quick, is how that build works and just completely obliterates everything. And then we
It's
have
beautiful.
characters like Pied Piper with Unchained Melody, where you use your ultimate and you don't even realize that health bars even moved. Like you can't even notice it. So
What does he say when he triggers it? It's like, man, I feel like I should know this. If when I'm playing Overwatch, I think I know what the characters say when their ultimates come out. And it's so funny because in Ravenswatch, it's such a non-issue that you can't picture the effect or hear the voice line. It's like that was underwhelming. I'm gonna just kind of block that in my memory.
no, I completely agree. One other item that we want to talk that we have just in this section. I mean, we kind of just go into other items after this, but is Dreamcatcher and uh, is it useful? You know, we're gonna play a game of is it useful? So reduces Sandman's Dream Try prices by 10%. The second time you take it, it goes down to 9%. Uh,
Yeah. So the way it stacks is it's 10% of whatever's left. So there's 90% left after the first time. So the next time
yeah,
it's going to be 9%, and the next one's going to be 8.1%. So it's going to just kind of keep slicing off smaller and smaller pieces of that
yeah.
price.
You never, nothing's ever 100% off. Nothing's ever free in life. So, um, except when you finish a full stack of this and you get one free purchase at the Sandman per chapter.
Woo!
If you finish this in chapter one, like congratulations, you get one free purchase. And honestly, you are going to be able to buy a lot of things. Again, the reason why this doesn't make sense is because there's Leprechaun Coin and Golden Egg Super Effect and Hope Diamond, where hey, you're actually getting damage for the money you're spending, and
Yeah,
you're
you
still able
want
to
to
buy
spend less
everything.
money? Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. You're going to the Baba Yaga fight with 3,000 dream shards in your pocket. Like that's not like no, she doesn't. She's not going to go through your pockets after she kills you. You know, she doesn't care. I mean, maybe she does actually. Maybe that's why it's in the game. Maybe she planted that so that you would die and have a bunch of money left over for her to keep.
and that's how she funds. That's how she pays for her house.
Conspiracy theory.
Um, the only time I take Dreamcatcher, for the most part, is if I open a chest and I see Goldilocks Borage, Voodoo Doll, Dreamcatcher, and I go, I don't want to use a reroll right now because there's other things I want. Let me take a Dreamcatcher. It's chapter one throughout the entirety of the game. Yeah, it's probably going to save me potentially if I'm buying like the big items, you know, potentially 300 Dream Shards throughout an entire run, potentially something like that. But uh, this, I don't know. I think what you were saying with having Leprechaun Coin attached to money as well, or Dream Shards as well, if that actually gets taken out of the game, I could see a place for Dreamcatcher being a little bit more important.
I agree. Yeah, this is one that we probably don't want to change if we do something to Leprechaun Coin. But in its current state, it's not. Don't take this. Don't touch this item unless it's like literally the worst items in the game, and you have a chance to where you could take it. But and that's something else that's interesting to talk about is that I don't really love the philosophy that sometimes you don't want to take any items at all because it's going to affect the possibility of duplicating items later.
Hmm.
I because this is maybe the Risk of Rain 2 in me, but in Risk of Rain, you pick up everything you see. And there's a chance that if you have a common item that you don't want, you're able to recycle it and turn it into something else.
Hmm.
And the super effects are so important to the game and they're so beneficial to the game. I would prefer it if we don't build the game or we don't go in a direction in the philosophy of the game where that sometimes when you go through this big fight and you get a chest, you're like, well, never mind. This is just too poor of an item for me to even consider it. I would I prefer not to. I would prefer it if the game if it was always a good decision to take an item, even if it doesn't synergize with what you're doing. Then if sometimes you're just like, oh, this is except if it's a cursed item. Maybe if it's a cursed item.
Hmm. No, I agree with that. It is. I've had that situation plenty of times where I open a chest and I'm like, let me go wait till I get more Leprechaun coins to go reroll this.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you walk away. It's like 30 seconds of invested time.
Uh-huh. And that 30 seconds of invested time, you're like, it is going to be more worth it to walk away from this and lose out on time than it is to take anything in this chest.
Yeah, so that's another reason why I think that being able to target your major shapings would be cool. Uh, or all your shaping spells would be cool. If you want to do something like that, you definitely need to rein in Leprechaun Coin. But I think, especially in a game like Ravenswatch, where you put so much effort into freeing up the camp to be able to take the item, not being able to take it, I think, is a poor end user experience. It's a poor player experience. So if that would be my philosophy and my takeaway on that.
Hmm. Okay, so next we had some items to talk about. Do you feel like we need to? Do you
I
feel like
kind
we
of
need
feel
to
like
skip
we,
anything here? Like skip Horn of
yeah,
Plenty and Green Armor?
I will say Horn of Plenty, the super effect is about 9 consumables worth of value, which is cool. We didn't talk about that earlier. Green armor though, I feel like we've pretty well talked about. It's cool. It stacks really, really well. Excalibur. This item has been the best item in the game, and then it's been kind of in the middle. And I would say I would put it in the top half, but it's better the later the run goes in most cases.
Yeah, I agree. I see Excalibur in um my side quest a lot in chapter one, and I don't take it because it's not providing any value for me. And I have a feeling, if I take a good amount of legendaries through the run, I can find it later. Uh, it pretty much is an only laking item. It's also another item that is really good that is just benefited from going Leprechaun Coin, Golden Egg, and Horn of Plenty. Or I mean,
Yeah,
Hope Diamond, because
yeah,
you want to get the full effect of this. You want to have all your talents at legendary. It still isn't bad if it's like your Arthur boss fight pull and you have like 3 or 4 talents at legendary. It's still way more worth it than a lot of the other things in here, depending on what your build is. But yeah,
yeah. I
no,
agree on that.
it's always been good. I think it will always stay good. And I think most runs I feel like I don't know if this is your experience, and we'll probably talk about this later, but I feel like I've been taking dream shards a lot more often out of grimoires. That could be in the specific challenge runs that I'm doing. I really need them for certain things, but I feel like I end up taking dream shards quite a bit now. I feel like it's a good pull, so I feel like Excalibur normally is worth it with a lot of my runs.
Yeah, I actually have noticed that when I've been watching that you've been taking more dream shards out of Grimoires, and that's like difficult for me to accept because I'm usually trying to force Leprechaun Coin, and
Hmm.
then the rerolls at a certain point are going to be better in terms of the money. But like, I think it's an indication of the feel that you have on the game that you know intuitively that this will get you to a good power scaling situation. So you need the money now, and that will get you somewhere better long term. So I think that's a game sense that you have developed a little bit more acutely than I have.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like challenge runs really enforce that by having a good chapter one. That if I see something like, Sands of Enlightenment, I see a grandiose shaping, a major shaping, and just some other good item, and I go, I need to buy this entire shop. I feel like chapter one, I end up taking Dream Shards so often, but a lot of times that also does net me in um, high talent levels, so that
Yeah.
Excalibur is enabled a lot of times by the end of the run.
And I was honestly, I haven't been using a lot of the things in the shop that help out with talents. And when I started watching your content a little bit more, I was like, oh, okay, actually, like Excalibur is better than I thought it was because you can do all this cool stuff with it. And then you have the crazy Sands of Oblivion, Leprechaun coin value, which is another crazy thing in the game. But
Yeah.
no, I think Excalibur is just solid. And another cool case for it is if you are going for a Bloody Mary's mirror build, but you don't have the armor and you're offered Excalibur. I mean, you don't have you don't have damage, so you're worried about being really fragile. Excalibur is kind of like that one thing that's just going to give you enough armor so that you can go into the Bloody Mary's mirror build really confidently. So I think
Yeah.
Excalibur just kind of works. It's a good item.
I think in the Bloody Mary's Mirror build, it's pretty much all the armor that you actually need. Like if you take Excalibur, you can focus armor the rest of the game to stack the Bloody Mary's Mirror flip.
Yeah, I agree. I think yeah, I think we've done this actually today. We've gone to a more extreme armor build, like a really lean hard into that. But the reality is, if you're taking Black Lotus, if you're taking, if you just have built-in regen, because a lot of characters have that, um, you don't need a whole lot more, and you'll get level scaling, and you'll heal from those as well. Just having a little bit of armor that will just make sure that you don't die to one mistake or even 3 mistakes, which because that's not too hard to come by. With Excalibur, you can probably get away with 3 mistakes even in a Baba Yaga fight. That's going to be enough. You're going to be able to manage your health pool, and you're going to be fine.
Hmm. The next thing that we have is Vorpal Blade, and Vorpal Blade has always been pretty good. You kill standard enemies at 20% health and elites at 10%. That is just you're clearing every single enemy 20% quicker or 10% quicker. That's really beneficial. It's more beneficial when the enemy is corrupted and say it's an elite, because that can be a little bit of time. This is very, very good in the specific challenge runs that I've been doing where I make everything corrupted.
Right.
It kind of just, it is almost enough to just take the corrupted modifier off, except they still do more damage, but it does that. And then in co-op, Vorpal Blade is one of the most important legendaries in the game. If someone can pull it out of the chapter 1 side quest, they almost always should, because of co-op scaling and how much more health everything has. This is going to save you so much time, and only one person needs it to have it. And I don't know entirely how it works. I say you're taking on a camp and that person isn't there. I think you still have to take them on and kill them all the way. I think they need to be near you for Vorpal Blade to work. So you just
Mm.
fight every camp with that person. But no, it's a very good item. Anything you have to
Yeah.
add on it?
I mean, I think Vorpal Blade is a situation where an item that is pretty good became really good because they updated the UI. So in prior to 1.0, you didn't have the little UI pop up when an enemy was in one shot territory, because the way Vorpal Blade works is it's not an execute, right? When they hit the threshold, they don't immediately die. When they hit the threshold, an icon pops up over their health bar, and then you know that you can follow up and you can get the kill. So because they introduced that little UI element, it became much more intuitive and comfortable to use. And I think that that's a great direction for item builds in philosophy in general. Is if there's an item that has an effect that's a little bit harder to understand how well it's working, give us some UI, give us some feedback. And I've seen this in other games as well. There's some stuff in Risk of Rain 2. There's this item that gives you extra damage in like a tight radius around the character. And we all knew it was kind of good, but we didn't know exactly how good. Then they updated the UI so you could see the radius, and you would also get special damage numbers when an instance of damage was being buffed by it. And all of a sudden, we were like, "Oh my goodness, this is so good!" So, yeah, I think Vorpal Blade is a great UI buff. Like that thing is what it is because we now understand it better because the UI is clearer.
Uh,
Baylor's Eye.
I
I mean,
really like the change to Baylor's Eye, except for it getting rid of ultimate.
yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because I really explored this one for the first time with Devourer on Scarlet. And that specific build, this is actually not quite as good because the numbers are lower. It used to be 150% per charge. Now it's only 100%, but you don't have to wait for all these stacks to come back. I think it's a far more flexible item, and it works for a lot more builds than it used to before.
My favorite iterations of Baylor's Eye are one effect affects another thing. Um, Say, for example, secondary tremors on Beowulf, which I think is potentially one of the best Baylor's Eye builds there is. And when it does that, when it's like, hey, your special affects your power affects your special, because secondary tremors, it lets you take a bunch of power charges, and you can then take a bunch of special cooldown, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't need to focus, you don't need to have like all of that going on for you perfectly. Where, and I mean, Baylor's Eye also is enabled by Raven Effigy as well, but also
Yeah.
there's actually an argument to be made there, and I think one of the reasons as well why I think the Baylor's Eye special build is potentially better than the power build is because you still get the Thunderstone. Like if you get to build into Thunderstone, which has that
Yeah.
lightning strike, which ignores armor. I I think the Thunderstone benefits from special damage, but I don't.
Oh, like the Thunder Strike?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And again, I'll have to actually go in and test these numbers, but from what I've seen, numbers wise, when I don't have special damage and when I do, I believe it gets the bonus damage from special damage like Jack of Diamonds, but I don't think it gets the benefit from Baylor's Eye.
That's
Um,
interesting. That's gonna be a fun one to test at some point. I have to say I don't know exactly how Lightning Strike works. It's one of those ones that's on my list of let's look into this and break it apart because sometimes it can be you're having lightning strikes on, gosh, last stream I think you may have had wasn't an Aladdin run, maybe it's a Geppetto run or something, and I was seeing like 5,000 damage procs off of lightning, and I'm like, okay, well that's not normal. Like that's a lot of damage.
yeah, and I think going Baylor's Eye in special builds is so beneficial as well. Because like say Vajra, the lightning there just casts from the starting location. The lightning homes in on an enemy with special, which is really nice. And if you have
Mhm.
three enemies together, the lightning from all, like if they're all right next to each other, they'll get hit with three different instances of lightning, which is
Yeah.
kind of insane. It normally just deletes enemies, and if you just add a Baylor's Eye special hit on what's happening there, it becomes insane. I know that the secondary tremors one I was talking about, you actually invest in the power, but say something um, like Scarlet, and you're going,
Yeah,
there you
let's
go,
go.
you're going
Yeah,
Scarlet
yeah.
and you're
You're
going
speaking my
Explosive
language
Rush.
now.
Yeah, and you run in there and you have
Explosive rush. Rip. Sorry. I'm okay. I'm okay.
no, 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 but still, if you have a bunch of special charges and you have the ability to trigger power from Explosive Rush. Wait, no, no, I'm talking about that the right way. Okay, I'm talking about that the right way.
Yeah, yeah, no,
If
you're legit. I would let you know if you're not. You're set.
thank you, I appreciate that.
I got you. I got
Um,
you.
yeah, and you have like things like pulverize triggering as well. It's an insane amount of damage. Like that actually is potentially the best. You know what, I'm thinking about it. That might be the best one. I know Explosive Rush was heavily neutered,
Yeah,
but that's just like a huge AoE hit on your Baylor's Eye attack.
yeah. The thing about explosive rush specifically is I feel. I mean, I guess it is a lot of damage, like with the Baylor's Eye. I don't know. The tricky thing there is that it's at maxed out. I think is it 70%? I believe it's
70,
70%
yeah.
of your base special damage. I feel like if you it's so hard to get those combo stacks up right now on Scarlet. Like even if you go Murderous Intent, that's 2 combo points per defense, and you
Mhm.
can't spam it in Wolf form because if you're in Wolf form, you actually can't hit the defense again until the previous duration has completed. So 5.5 second space that can be modified with Murderous Intent. Um, so it gets the thing that is really sad is that I feel like Explosive Rush, you can't squeeze out the combo points high enough. It's almost more sensible to stay away from the Baylor's Eye, to go pulverize, and then to take like Disney explosions. And then if you're in wolf form, hypothetically, you're just jumping back and forth. You have all the iframes from that. And that's one of the big downsides, by the way, Baylor's Eye.
That's
Some
true.
characters, those are your iframes. And if you're really good, you probably don't have problems. But if you're not as good, me, then sometimes you want those iframes. And I feel that a lot with Scarlet because your special is an iframe and your power is an iframe in wolf form. So, uh, I mean, I guess that the power is always an iframe. It's the special that isn't always an iframe. But yeah, explosive rush makes me sad to talk about. But that's a character conversation, I guess. I'd say that Baylor's Eye, that I did the math, and this 100% is 5 times. Sometimes I was wondering honestly when I was starting to look into multiplicative damage. I was like, is this one of these 100% that's actually a 2 times multiplier if you see it? But I did the math. I checked it out. It's an additive effect, so
Mhm.
it's the effect of 5 times whatever the pertinent face card is. So 5 King of Clubs for 1 power charge used by Baylor's Eye. It's really strong. It's going to look really good for some people, but the fact that you have Baba Yaga in the game, I think, is a big balancing factor for the majority of the player base.
Yeah, I actually think you did remind me and talk me out of it because I did another Scarlet run on the challenge modifiers and it was a special build. And I remember saying, dude, this was just a complete special spam build. I remember saying, I'm not taking Baylor's Eye because in Baba Yaga, I'm going to leapfrog as Wolf and never be touched.
Yeah,
And
no,
that's
that's the
way more
way to do it.
important. So, no, that actually does make sense.
But it's sad because I would love to just stack that all up, right? Like the idea of making a delete button. I think that this build in general, like this concept in general, is cool. That you have a delete button build,
Mhm.
and you don't really get to do that with explosive rush anymore.
Yeah, I had the Baba Yaga one shot video on Aladdin thinking that Sword Jin, Jin's Might, Jin's Fury is probably the hardest hitting instant burst of damage in the game. And like stacking or with Enchanted Jin as well to get the crit and the King of Clubs power, I was thinking one of the only ways I could really think to get a Baba Yaga one shot is like Baylor's Eye is necessary. It doesn't happen without Baylor's Eye in my mind. Um,
Right?
and,
Yeah,
that's an enabler for that. So that's in my mind
yeah.
the only reason it worked.
Yeah, I mean, and I'd be curious to see how it looks when you start thinking about because pulverize being multiplicative, that's a pretty big boost with energy, with maybe potentially your power if you go into a big special power build. That's the other cool thing about explosive rush when it was a Scarlet thing is that it allowed the power build and the special build to coexist and feed off of each other. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's probably going to be better ways to do it. I think that Scarlet's not really. Uh, I love her to death. She maybe she isn't the delete button though for that particular challenge.
Hmm. So the next one we have is Hope Diamond, and I feel like we could keep this one kind of quick. How do you feel about Hope
Yeah,
Diamond? Do you like where
that's
it is or
good.
no?
Yeah, and if we adjusted Leprechaun Coin, then maybe we should see how Hope Diamond. I think Hope Diamond would honestly be worse, and yet I think it would still be good.
I think if we changed Leprechaun Coin, it would not be doing nearly as much, and it would still be a take every single time. And I think that's fine. I think that's fine. I think having
No, I
something
do too.
that can get you dream shards, and again, you're not guaranteed it, but I think something that can get you dream shards in this game is still fine to have in the game. Even if it is one of the strongest things, I think it is fine. It used to be 100%, and that was insane. I think 50 is fine. I
Yeah.
also think I think a lot of people feel Hope Diamond is like the true cursed item because I think a lot of people pick up Hope Diamond and then lose all their money and they go, I hate this item and I love it. So
Yeah, and it's interesting too because Hope Diamond is one of those that when I started hearing that it was good and I started taking it, then I was actually really frustrated a lot. I think I have some videos of me dying with thousands of dream shards,
mhm.
and that's that is I think the epitome of a cursed item. Like Hope Diamond as it is, I think it kind of works, and I'm good with that.
I think also one of the areas where it is a little bit balanced is you are now incentivized to travel back to base more often. And while, yeah, you are getting stronger every time you travel back to base and are probably, you're probably making up for the time lost. You are losing a lot of time every time you have to travel because you don't want to lose those dream shards. I have a
Sure.
problem of hoarding my dream shards and just the way I play, and I'll have 1,700 dream shards and I'll be like, let me do these two more camps before I go travel back. But
Yeah, no, 100%. That's real talk right there.
um, our next one is Hungry Grass,
Feel like
which,
we've kind of gone over it, right? It scales off of globes. It gives you damage. It's retroactive right now if you've died, but only if you die. So if you take it and you haven't died yet, you don't get the benefit.
yeah,
Um, it's and I think that for you, it's almost always a pickup. Like if it's offered, it's one of those. It's like a top tier one. For me, I'd say that I I mess up and die again and lose the buff often enough that I'm a little bit more leery of it. But that's a skill expression thing, and I think it's cool that you play around it differently depending on your play style and like your limits.
yeah, I think it's one of the best ways to get damage in the game, like just that actual damage number. And I think in the current runs that I'm doing though, where I can't die, I do need to see this early or chapter one or chapter two for me to really want to take it. But yeah, most nightmare runs, I still will look for this. The fact that it is retroactive and it can be a chapter three pickup and do 80 damage for you, I think is awesome. Um, I I also was talking with someone, and the optimal way to play co-op is for you to all leave the starting area and die and just
Yeah,
trade revives so you can all instantly get hungry grass. So there you
yeah,
go. There's optimal
that is a
play.
lot of time. That is a lot of time investment to get that up and running. But I mean, it makes sense, right? And um, I don't know. Maybe it should be retroactive on the first as well as on all the subsequent deaths. I think that would be if we're going to lean into this. I'd say that's the way we lean into it. If it's no longer retroactive, then I think the item is going to fall a lot in its popularity.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Items that are dependent on when you get them, like Philosopher's Stone as well, I do think their popularity is just diminished if there's not easy access to them in Chapter 1. And
Yeah,
yeah, I also kind of do agree it potentially being retroactive right from the start of the game is it's kind of interesting that it's not with how it does work.
yeah.
Um, Next we have Oni Mask. Oni Mask has had so many different changes. Oni Mask, do you remember when it used to it gave you
Oh,
20 damage for every more cursed item than legendary?
what was the? Oh, that's what it was.
That was
Okay,
the
yeah,
old
I
one.
remember this.
Then
I
it
tell you,
oh
this
go
one
on.
tripped me up. I had such a hard time because they changed the way that this one worked. They also changed how Eternal Rose worked. Old Eternal Rose is basically modern Flaming Pearl super effect, or it's in that vein. I think it's technically maybe a little bit different, but
Yeah.
I remember I had a build where that I picked it up thinking it was the old behavior, and it wasn't, and I just pancaked. That was not a twist that I was ready for. I feel like Oni Mask now is a lot more situational. Well, no, I guess it's about the same amount situational, isn't it? But uh, I actually haven't thought about how we built around it before.
I,
That would have that would have been a really like annoying mechanic, actually.
I think Oni Mask was 15 a little bit ago, like prior to 1.0. And then I think before that it was 2010, 20 damage and 10 vitality. So I think it went through a
Yeah.
few changes. With the challenge runs that I play where I have zero vitality, and I normally don't take vitality, I almost take this every time. This is great for me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
It incentivizes you to take more cursed items from your pools if you can. There's it is good damage. You can normally end up with around 45 to 60 in most cases. It depends how lucky you are with red wishing wells. I do think vitality though is a lot harder to come by just in general. Like you have your main source of vitality is your healing fountains, and
Yeah.
with Horn of Plenty's change, I don't think in general, I don't think a lot of people are taking vitality out of Grimoires, and I don't think a lot of people are taking vitality out of Horn of Plenty. So I think most vitality right now is currently coming from fountains. So for a lot of people, that actually could be pretty punishing because say you only get 2 to 3 healing fountains in a chapter and you're not picking them all up, you might just be losing all your health. If you have 3 or 4 legendaries with Oni Mask.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a thought-provoking, interesting decision when you are offered an Oni mask. I take it a lot of the time when I see it. It's interesting because if you look at the cursed items, a lot of them are pretty situational. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's maybe 3 or 4 that if you see, you're pretty likely to take, and there's a lot of them where that they will just straight up you know ruin a run, or they have the potential to be really problematic, or they have no impact at all.
Yeah.
um, so I think Oni Mask is interesting because it's going to be better the better the rest of the pool is. And so right now the pool of cursed items is some of them are really really good, but some of them are kind of not so inspiring. And I think that if the cursed pool was a little bit sharper, then this item would probably be better than it is.
Mm-hmm.
And if you round down a couple of the high performers right now, if Baylor's Eye got affected some way, which I don't necessarily feel like it should be, but if it were, then it would also affect Oni Mask. So it's an interesting one from a balance perspective.
Mm-hmm. Uh, Next we have Black Lotus. Black Lotus attacks
Black
gain
Lotus is good.
5% lifesteal, and healing orbs don't affect you. I think a lot of characters have really, really good attack builds. People have also informed me that Geppetto now benefits from this with his dummies, which is insane. I want to try
Yeah,
that.
I actually had an experience with that recently, and it's really cool. It's very strong. It's interesting though because okay, so something I didn't realize is that you can sometimes be healed for less than a hit point if your instance of damage is sufficiently small.
Yep.
So I told myself that it isn't good on Piper because if you get it early on Piper, then your individual hits don't give you a full HP of healing, and so you don't see it. But actually, it's kind of always pretty decent if you're going to be leaning into your attacks. There's a handful of situations maybe where I wouldn't want to take it. I think that sometimes you'll have a build going into Baba Yaga that's really reliant on your special or your power, and then the globes are just enough for you, and you don't want to have to be trying to figure out how and when to land an attack
Yeah.
on her. So in those situations, it's not as good.
I think, well, you brought up Pied Piper. Anything that triggers with attack can heal as well. So Pied Piper with Chorus, and if you have multiple specials, can basically instant heal
Oh
you.
yeah,
Scarlet with Fan of Spikes, you have healing from a distance now. If you're Wolf Form and you use your defense, you get a double heal on that from the Wolf Form defense and from Black
super
Lotus.
good.
The only character that I would avoid this on, I mean, if you're not going a full attack build, like you're saying, if you're not really focusing on your attack, then maybe it's not worth it. But Carmilla, this is terrible for you. Her attack
Oh
is
yeah,
terrible. So this is
it's a
brutal.
it's such a satisfying attack too. That's the thing about Carmilla is that her audio design and the feel of the character, you're like, oh yeah, get in there and just slice people up with your attacks. And that's actually not the best way to play the character. It's not even like top five.
Mhm.
And so but yeah, Black Lotus is usually pretty solid. It even works with Melusine's ultimate, right? So like what's the one, the dance one?
Wisp
Uh
Ballet.
Wisp Ballet, thank you. Wisp, the dance one. It even works with Ballet Wisps. So there's a lot of cool things you can do with that one.
So we have Baba Yaga's Mortar next. I have 2 thoughts on this. The challenge
Okay,
runs I'm doing with Angry Birds. I love this.
very good.
There we
So
go.
good.
Actually, I have 3 thoughts. Hope Diamond and Hungry Grass. Cool. I
Also really
avoided
good.
it.
Yeah,
And then the third thought is I have Oni Mask and Bloody Mary's Mirror appeared and Cauldron appeared. Cool. Here's 15 more damage.
yeah, yeah. I feel like the changes to it because before it was a weird revive, right? Because you revive, but you were strong, but you were vulnerable. You had strength, but you had vulnerable,
Oh, I forgot about that.
and that was weird, wasn't it? That
Uh-huh.
was something else. I thought it was kind of an interesting concept. We moved away from it. This is maybe a little bit less creative, but it's functionally very I think it also was bugged before. Come to think of it, I think that you still lost your Raven Feather or something. There was something weird going on with Baba Yaga's mortar. I feel like in its current state, it's just good. Yeah, it's just solid.
Yeah, what you were saying earlier, there's some cursed items that are really good that you almost want every time, and there's some cursed items that can break your build. So this is one that if you see it and you see two items that can break your build, you're kind of relieved. You're like, oh, thank God, it's not another one that can break my build.
So if you let's see, so if you have Baba Yaga's mortar and you have Oni Mask, and you consume your Baba Yaga's mortar, do you lose the damage or do you still have it?
I think you still keep it. I have footage of that somewhere. I'll have to look at it, and I think I remember making a statement on what happened. I don't remember the statement. I think it was that you keep it.
That's cool. Yeah, that's pretty neat. I think it would have been kind of sad if you didn't keep it. I think that that's a good way for the behavior to work in the game right now.
Mm. So then we have some
Sleeper items.
So we kind of
Yeah.
talked about Dragonhide. Do you think we talked about it enough? I think we
Yeah,
might have.
I think we're covered on Dragonhide. I feel like we understand it.
And we talked about mermaid tears. The one thing I wanted to add with the mermaid tears is, uh, I think one of the best ways to play a challenge run. If you don't want to do the 5 negative modifiers that I'm doing, I completely understand that. If you do one, corrupted or disease. Corrupted really changes how the game feels with enemies pools, and it really kind of forces you to increase your clear speeds and play in a way where you are damaging everything at once. But disease really makes you value your life and really makes you value taking hits and like how much you can avoid that. And mermaid tears becomes pretty important in those, which you end up just countering the modifier that you added to yourself. But it's cool now because you pay attention so much more to how much each heal is doing to you. Uh, so if you have a healing talent that says it does 14 and it's now dealing 7, that feels really, really bad. But getting a mermaid tears and actually seeing that health increase is really beneficial. And then the next, sorry, I'm gonna go on to just 2 in a row.
Yeah.
The next one is golden coated chainmail, where damage taken within 1 second cannot exceed 50% of your maximum health. Why I like golden coated chainmail is it can, if you know how to play it and if you're playing it right, you can ignore vitality and armor pretty much entirely. There is still an argument for taking armor, and I'll mention that briefly. But oh, I got a cat that's real happy to see me. Hello, buddy. Um,
Lucky ducky.
Golden coated chainmail becomes a game of you take a big hit and you drop down to 50%. You now need to heal yourself above 50%, even to 51%, so you don't die next hit. The thing you want to do is try to have enough healing that you can get yourself up to, say, 80%. Then you take another big hit and you drop down to 30%. All right, now heal yourself up above 50%. And it becomes a game of just doing that over and over. And if you can play relatively safely and avoid a lot of hits, it becomes a game of get hit, heal as quickly as I can, do whatever I can, whatever abilities I have, then take the other hit.
Yeah.
The one area where you would want armor is, again, I play with berserker foes and corrupted, so things do a lot of damage, is I don't want like a gargoyle to set a lava pool on the floor and I step on that and that do I don't want that to also do
Oh yeah.
50% damage to me. So I'll want
Yeah.
to take armor so that I'm not always having to play this game of, hey, heal above that, like you need to be at this much. It's just like if a giant knight does a, Michael Jordan slam dunk on me, I want that to be like the thing that does 50% to me. I really, really like mermaid tears in those, and I like that idea and play style of take a lot of damage, heal past that, take a lot of damage, heal past that. It's kind of like a fun and really like you're on the edge of your seat for a lot of the gameplay as you're like, oh my god, am I above 50? Or like I need to get above 50 right here. So
It makes you wish that unicorn horn was a little bit better, right?
it does. Yeah, no, 100% it
Yeah.
does.
I think Golden Coat of Chainmail it's not the coolest like aesthetically, but like there are some cool things you can do with it. Like you're saying, in that window when it's procced, you're untouchable. You and I think we could do some cool things with it. I also kind of think that this is one that could benefit from a little bit of UI around it, so you know when you're over or below the threshold. Maybe if like there's a gold overlay on your health bar or something.
Mhm.
Uh, this is one of those that I think players underrate a little bit. Also, I think that it's going to be more noticeable in the runs that you're having, right? Because
Yeah.
you're playing against things that can legitimately just end your run in one mistake, and a golden coat of chainmail just covers that seamlessly. So it's an item that is maybe not as celebrated, but I think it's still good, and I think a UI honestly would do a lot for its reputation.
Mhm. And I think one that kind of helps out with golden coated chainmail a little bit as well is holy grail. You restore. It's so funny at level 1, you restore 8 health to all nearby heroes. They changed this from a 10% to a flat number.
Yeah.
Where that flat number is beneficial is if you do take no vitality. I believe that flat number, it might still just be 10% at that flat number. I'm not sure. But if you take a
Mhm.
lot of vitality, this flat number now becomes a lot worse. So in these challenge runs I'm doing, Holy Grail becomes pretty vital as part of that dance with Golden Coated Chainmail and getting above 50. And Holy Grail also, its benefit just goes up in co-op the more players you're playing with. Having an entire
Yeah.
team with Holy Grail is uh, you only have the one cooldown for yourself where you can heal 5 seconds. If you use it and then another character uses it, you'll also get that heal. So it's really, really beneficial in co-op.
Yeah, it's interesting because you compare it to like Soothing Presence on Another Scene. It's actually I mean, it's a pretty good. It's pretty competitive and pretty comparable to some of those talents in the game. Another thing that's cool to realize about it is it does scale off of your level. So
Mm-hmm.
it's 8 at its base. It's going to scale well, and then there's some builds where that you're going to be able to spam your defenses, like your Geppetto run recently, where that you're using Forked Lightning, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and you just have a ton of defense charges. Geppetto's a great candidate for this too because his defense is a little bit of a shorter duration, and you have the shield that comes from it. In that situation, a Holy Grail is really in fantastic sustain. It's so strong, and I like that it has that use case where that okay in its base state it's not a must-have, but supposing I'm running Wolf only Scarlet, perish the thought, and I have a whole bunch of defense synergy, then that's going to be really good for me, especially because I have the extra armor when I pop my defense. So yeah, I think Holy Grail is a cool item, and the situational nature of its design and of its numbers right now really accentuate its best features.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then probably one of the most like sleeper items in the game, Fairy Dust. Um,
Oh yeah,
Fairy Dust, when you take damage, you gain 18 shield. Again, this is another one that scales with your level. And then is super effect 50% to any shield applied or received. Is really cool. There's some, not all shield talents are treated equally. There's some that are really good. Like, honestly, Beowulf's Battle Cry, because that resets everyone's power as well as gives them shield. That's a really cool one. Um, Geppetto is an obvious candidate for applying shield. But what I really like about Fairy Dust is it's just instant. Like you take damage. Say there's a dagger cultist that comes up and swings on you, hits you with the first attack. It does health damage. You now instantly have shield and can probably take the next two swipes and then get out of there by the fourth and fifth swipe that you don't take that damage. So this can. Oh, I have a cat at the door. I'm gonna let him out in a sec. But this can really just help you negate a lot of damage in your run. And that 50% shield applied or received is a very, very big number. I'm gonna let you talk as I let my cat.
yeah, absolutely. I think another cool thing about Fairy Dust is, well, honestly, it kind of feels like Golden Coat Chainmail to me in some ways, because Golden Coat Chainmail, you take an instance of damage and you have some space to react and to do something with it. Fairy Dust is like that, but it's going to be applied every single time. It's not quite as strong of an effect, but it's actually a more consistently useful effect because you're not actually trying to play to take damage. So Fairy Dust matters in those times when you take damage. It's also going to help as well if you're taking more damage than just the flat block that it gets you. So uh, I like that. The plus 50% is also strong because shield scales slightly better than health scaling on characters. So health scaling is 10%. Shield scaling is 15% on those characters who do have a shield related talent or ability. I think Fairy Dust is a little bit slept on because again, it's a defensive talent. A lot of the time, people are not playing with a lot of modifiers, but it also doesn't get affected by the disease modifier, right? It's like just giving you the same value in is giving you the same value in those situations that it would at Nightmare and lower. So Fairy Dust is one of those really safe items. It's not going the reason it doesn't even quite get picked as much as say a Dragonhide is because it doesn't have a damage component to its kit. But situationally, really strong.
I think one of the cool things to do as well is pair it with the Charm Stone if you can get the ×3 effect on that, and having a shield pretty much. I mean, it's on a 6 second cooldown for dash. Uh, that's you're likely not going to lose more shield than that in the 6 seconds, depending on the hit. And then if you do
Yeah.
get hit, Fairy Dust then reapplies, and then you have 30 seconds on that. So you can just negate so much damage. I think it was a buff for Fairy Dust to put it in rare and make you only have to stack 4 of those rather than the 5 because you really want that super effect with Fairy Dust. It's really nice.
Yeah.
But where it is a nerf is now it's put in rares with your damage dealing magical objects, and golden egg, which I
Yeah,
think
the
is
competition is pretty stiff in there.
yeah, and I think that's a thing. That's a reason why like is this our next topic? Stuff that kind of bites right now. It is. That's stuff
Oh
why
yeah.
that's why things
uh,
like Queen of
Tim's
Hearts.
favorite.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tim.
Yeah,
I know you
sorry,
love this
Tim.
item.
Tim, I know you love this item because you've taken it in one run and never ever again, and you're gonna hold on to it.
Yeah, he's got a portrait of Queen of Hearts like above his computer that he looks at when he plays for sure. It's really this is really hurtful for us to have to tell you this, and I apologize. This wasn't my idea. I'm throwing Ace under the bus.
So yeah, things that just aren't like great right now. Unicorn, or we'll go Queen of Hearts first. This super effect, 30 damage while at full health, is kind of cool, but that's so much investment into this rare for 30 damage, where one golden egg by the end of your run can do that at all times. Uh,
Yeah.
and you also don't get Queen of Hearts in like your boss fights and stuff. You do in Baba Yaga actually in between where she's doing the skulls, which is funny, but um,
Hmm.
you don't.
Game breaking, by the way. Yeah, if you have that now your build is coming together for sure.
Well, and I feel like one of the things that's tough with Queen of Hearts is I feel like it's better if you know what you're doing in the game pathing wise, because you know you're going to be in combat less often if you know how to path better, but also if you know how to path better you probably need Queen of Hearts less. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit
It's
of
a
this
very
conundrum.
sustainy item, and it gets its value from when you're not doing anything proactive, which is not good. Not a good play to incentivize. So, Queen of Hearts is it's in a rough spot. And again, like the armor, like the not if you're at full health going into every fight to try to get this value, then man, I just don't know that that's really a condition that you can play toward very often. I just don't think that there's so many ways, easier ways to build your game in Ravenswatch that are much easier to execute and to give you better results. So it's always I don't think that there's an item that I prioritize less than Queen of Hearts.
Yeah, and another thing, I mean the only one that I don't know, I can really toss up Queen of Hearts or Unicorn Horn. um Critical health gain 4 regeneration. That will scale with your level, right?
Um,
Does it?
well, I think it. Well, hold on. I think that regen is basically like you're getting a vitality's worth of healing. No, is it percentage based? I don't know exactly how it works. I don't think that was the vitality thing I said, um, but I think it does. I think regen is a percentage based heal potentially, possibly. Don't quote me on that. It does feel pretty good. When I trigger it, it's like, oh, this is actually significant. I've definitely had times where the unicorn horn has surprised me a little bit, and that's maybe why I slot it just a tad above Queen of Hearts. It's also a heal in a situation where you really need a heal, whereas Queen of Hearts is sometimes giving you value in situations where it's not as relevant.
Mhm.
But ideally, you're probably not at critical health that often. So,
Yeah,
uh,
this is a thing that you don't want to be triggering.
yeah,
But again, it does trigger when you need it. The unfortunate thing as well is you can be at 50% health and just be one shot, and now, oh, my unicorn horn didn't get the proc. Like you need to be hit to a very specific threshold that a lot of times if you're right above that threshold, you might be in a one shot range from that range.
yeah,
Um, the other thing is this super effect is, I think, very counterintuitive with what you're going to be doing when this triggers. 50 damage under a regeneration effect. The benefit that we talked about, and actually you're going to talk about this later with our next section, but this benefit, you're normally running away from combat when you're at this low health. Like you're like, I don't want to die, get me away from here.
yeah.
But it's like, hey, you have 50% more or 50 more damage. Yeah, go in. This is your time. And you're like, no, Pastic,
Yeah,
no,
it's like
please.
your Yu-Gi-Oh trap card. You're like, aha, I fall right in right where I wanted you, and then the cultist slaps you again. You fall over dead, and you're like, oh, well, dang it.
Yeah, yeah.
That was not quite the iconic last stand I had in mind, but it was a last stand. So that part at least is consistent. Yeah, I Unicorn Horn. I have a little bit of love in my heart because I had a really cool Millicene run one time where I went Shimmering Scales and I go to chapter one and I'm able to manage the damage incoming really smoothly. And so I get the 50% damage effect in chapter one against a chapter one boss. Man, that's like it's a pretty chunky, like healthy effect. But like the conditions to trigger it, you just can't guarantee that the things that are hitting you are going to stop at critical health and be like, okay, you can now reset and line up all your things, and we're just going to watch. It's just not consistent enough, and it really pales in comparison to its competition.
Do you have an idea of a different super effect? Because I was thinking, and my numbers are based off the Raven Skull and how much armor you get there, being 40, and you get that at all times. I was thinking like a unicorn horn, like while under regeneration, get 80 armor. Would that be too strong, or do you think that that's something like it can really really help and try to prevent you from dying in that final hit there? But I could also see that potentially being too strong if you have that super effect stacked.
I mean, it's interesting because if you have a lot of armor already in your build, and then you get that 80% and your health is low, that's another thing is that armor isn't as good when your health is really low. That's unfortunately like it. If you have enough of it, but if the armor that is good at 100% health is not as compelling at 20% health.
Hmm.
So what I actually kind of unironically, I kind of do like the super effect. If only regen could be something that you could get to more often. Um, we don't have that many talents in the game that give regen effect. We don't have that many. We don't have that many. I mean, the base effect right now only triggers when you're at critical health. So the one thing that I think would be kind of interesting: what if the threshold changed depending on how many stacks you had? So you don't get as much regen, but you do also get this big damage buff if you have a full stack. Does that compete well? Does that stack up well against the other items I see in this column that do damage? I don't know. It is kind of neat though if it had a survivability component and a component that helps your damage in some way. Because if you have an item that just does passive defensive things, it has to do it really, really well to justify fitting it into a build. Like green armor does. Green armor works because it's just so strong. Even if you have a couple of them. But yeah, unicorn horn. I mean, I'm kind of down. Like, what if we had more sources of regeneration? Maybe this becomes a decent item.
Yeah, I guess that actually is true. If you had to wait up, I think Melusine has the ultimate that drops the regen bubble. If there was more stuff like that where you can hit that and actually have regen, that would be
Yeah,
pretty cool.
earlier on. Yeah, because if it's coming at level 10, like the build is already defined. I think that yeah, you don't really want to be playing around the thing that's going to only start to do something for your run at level 10. But it's cool that we have stuff like that. I like the idea that there's some things like and region's a hard thing to balance because if you have health on demand all the time so easily, then I don't know. There's downsides to that as well. It's a tricky thing from a balance perspective.
Mm. Okay, moving on. We have gold.
Oh,
What
do
do
you want
you?
to go Goldilocks?
Yeah, Goldilocks porridge.
Goldilocks first?
Yeah.
I think yeah. Goldilocks porridge. I don't. Okay, again, I actually kind of like the super effect, but there's not that many sources of strength because if you're getting it from healing orb, then it's kind of okay-ish. The other thing about the super effect is that it's okay early on if you get it early on, but because commons are hard to stack, I think that it's interesting. I think epics are the easiest super effects now to get,
Hmm.
and commons are the hardest. Um, it's a lot of effort to get a Goldilocks porridge stack running, and then at that point you have 20 damage, which could, if you're building really strongly into an attack build, could just as easily be an ace of spades. So I don't know. I think that the trigger effect, like on the status effect on a target or on yourself, does something is a cool idea, but the numbers on Goldilocks porridge and the RNG involved and the control don't justify it at all.
Yeah. Why I like Goldilocks porridge is because strength is a different source of damage, right? That gets to be added to your damage calculation.
Sure.
Um, Strength on a lot of characters like Aladdin and Beowulf and stuff like that becomes very, very noticeable, especially if you are taking this early on and you're trying to stack this. I don't try to stack Goldilocks porridge for the super effect, like the 20 extra damage. What you're saying, just like an ace of spades. I don't really care about it. But why I try to stack it is what I want to happen with Goldilocks porridge. Normally, when you pick up a healing orb, you're starting to clear a camp, right? The camp's
Mhm.
almost dead. Sure, it's going to help. If you have two stacks of this and you have it for 8 seconds, it's going to help you clear the rest of the camp. I want 5 stacks so that I can pick up two orbs in a camp and have 40 seconds and go into the next camp and start with strength and then get three orbs from that camp and get just stack that strength so that strength is up all the time. And I can have it all the time because it feels really bad when you're like, cool, I just picked up like three orbs and I have one or two Goldilocks porridge and I made it into the next camp and now I no longer have strength and I'm fighting the next camp basically how I fought the last camp. You need
Yeah.
a lot of this for it to just like work how you imagine it working. And if that's the case, then I actually love this item. I love this item when I have that. I love seeing a huge bar of strength that's like, have you done the full stack of this where you just have,
Uh, a handful of times. I've noticed that though. Like you're going from camp to camp and you check your bar and you're like, oh, I still have this. This is sticking around. This is actually legit.
Well, you can see your bar and it can have like 1/4 of the total duration of orbs that you've picked up, right? You can see that. And you're like, oh no, I'm almost out of strength. But if you have like 5 stacks of this and you've picked up, 50 orbs, that can still be like 3 minutes left, even though it's only 1/4 of the bar. And you're like,
Oh,
oh,
I
I
have
just
not done that. Oh,
yeah.
that's funny.
I've
That's funny
done
UI.
entire fights like the chapter 2 side quest where I'm fighting the Cyclops where I'm not getting any orbs and I see it at 1/4 and I beat the boss and it's like it's maybe at 3/8 now and I'm like, did that even go down? Like, what's going on? It's just because you have so much orbs stacked up that yeah, when the UI adds it keeps all the time from the previous orbs. And so you're never going to really fill it up, but I don't know. I love this item, but it is a full commitment. Like having one or two of this item is so much worse than having one or two leprechaun coins, one or two mermaid tears, or like green armor. I prefer pretty much every other item. I'd prefer honestly two voodoo doll over two Goldilocks porridges in most runs, which is kind of
Yeah.
crazy. But I think it just is one of the few items that needs the full stack for it to be beneficial in my mind.
That's interesting. I'll have to try it out a little bit more, trying to do stuff with full stacks because I really haven't prioritized it a ton. But like I will say, strength is a cool attribute. It's going to be additive with things like vulnerable and marked. It's interesting that it's not that good because 4 second duration matches most starting durations for a lot of these things. Vulnerable and armor break is 3 seconds. I think it's 3 seconds off of an Aladdin dash. 3 seconds off of where is it? Ring of Dispel. So that kind of duration is pretty common, but it's coming from picking up the globe, which may or may not be when you're applying your damage and you're thinking about that side of what you're doing. So,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, it's interesting. I, the common pool, the common item pool is so competitive right now, and
Mhm.
that's really what hurts Goldilocks Forage.
And I think with those other things like armor break and stuff is when you're triggering it, like you get to choose this is the trigger. I want this to happen right now. Like Aladdin, I play a lot of Sword Jin. I know I'm backflipping and I have that few seconds of vulnerable and I know I'm gonna get this within time. If I pick up an orb and it's like, or I see an orb and it's on the other side, I'm like, oh, I gotta wait for that for the enemy to get close before I pick this up and get some usefulness out of this. And I don't know if I'm gonna be able to re-trigger it in this fight.
Yeah, that's a really relevant part of what holds it back. But it's the concept of it is neat and it's cool because a lot of characters don't have strength in their kit.
Mm,
So I like the idea of having an item that will bring one of those attributes into the character's kit and consider and could open up some synergies as well.
mm.
You want to voodoo doll a little bit?
Yeah, yeah, we'll voodoo doll.
Voodoo doll. Go ahead. What do you think? Heart
They
of hearts.
they buffed voodoo doll. It used to be 10, now it's 15. So it's like I see that 15 and I'm so tempted every time. Um,
Yeah.
my thoughts on voodoo doll are this is 15% damage to bosses. Yes, it does include the mini bosses, but it does not matter how long your boss fight goes. Like if you're in a chapter 1 boss fight, if you take 10 minutes in that, and for whatever reason you have good camp clear speeds, and you have to fight a 10-minute boss fight, it doesn't matter if you fought a 10-minute boss fight because your timing doesn't matter. Your timing matters in the game where there's camps where enemies don't actually get any benefit from you taking voodoo doll, or like
Yeah.
there's no damage increase there. You're not going to see it, and you're not going to help the 18 minutes that you have to go through a chapter.
Yeah.
Um,
Voodoo doll really only matters in situations where that your build is lacking enough that you're worried about the outcome of that boss fight. If you're in a situation where that you're like, if I'm in here for very long, I cannot sustain through this fight. Like I know that the burden of execution will be too high. And I don't have enough survivability to sustain if I make a mistake. That's the situation where voodoo doll starts to matter a little bit. And in that situation, it's not that much of a difference. It's not that big of a bonus.
mm,
And it doesn't help at all in terms of your farming and like your play in in earlier chapters particularly. It has the downsides of your trying to stack green armor early, that it doesn't do anything for your clearing speeds, with the added problem that it also in the late game it's only kind of good if it's one of the last items that you're offered, like before Baba Yaga or before another chapter boss. But it's considerably, I'd say that there's a window in chapter 3 as you're wrapping up. Maybe you have a lot of other things going on in your kit. If you get offered a voodoo doll in that situation, I mean, it makes sense. It's not so bad.
mhm.
But the super effect is only going to matter in that boss fight. The base effect only matters in that boss fight, and that is like 5% of your game.
Yeah, and I also find that super effect normally doesn't even matter. Like the 5%, that Baba Yaga's the only boss that doesn't have like a damage phase. But most
Yeah.
of their bosses, like if it's 5% and you don't kill them in the damage phase, you can normally just burst them down right after that.
Yeah.
I think a super effect. I don't know what to do for a super effect here. One thing that I wish this had was, and again, it would have less usefulness in easier difficulties, but uh, one way to make it universal, whatever difficulty, is make it affect elites. I understand it's going to be 15% against elites. Make it elites at a much smaller percent, maybe like 5% on elites.
Yeah.
That way, if you stacked five of them, you'd have 25% more damage on elites, which I think is kind of fair. And I don't know if it's still entirely worth it, but it would be something. And then,
Well, and it's going to be cool too when you're running challenge modifiers, right? It's one of those things that's
mhm,
going to kind of like Mermaid Tears becomes better outside of the base game, and I think that that's cool.
that's true. And I think honestly, if they did something like that, make that super effect also work against elites. But I think you could almost increase that 5%. Maybe make it not kill bosses at 5% and make it kill almost. I mean, it is kind of like then just taking a Purple Blade, but maybe give it
Yeah.
Purple Blade's effect on elites.
Yeah, and we have things like this in Risk of Rain 2. There's an item called Old Guillotine, and it stacks hyperbolically. So the more stacks you have, the lower return value you get. But it's really impactful and noticeable against the elites in the games that sometimes have 4 or 8 times the health pool of a regular enemy. So I think that something like Voodoo Doll is an interesting opportunity to work around the fact that big enemies can be so chunky, right?
Hmm.
But it has to be able to do something in other phases of the game, right? It has to have an effect that's going to matter more than just like that last sigh before the fight with Baba Yaga starts. And it doesn't do that right now.
Mm-mm. No. I think that's it on Voodoo Doll.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Let's Father Time's Hourglass, I want to call it out. I don't know if we need to talk a ton about it. I think this is one, by the way, that could potentially be better than we think it is because you don't have a whole lot of UI and feedback. Like sometimes I think you get your cooldowns back and you just don't know about it
Mhm.
because you don't have any muscle memory around this, right? It's going to be triggering when your health pool is low, when you're sweating and scared because you just took a bunch of damage.
Mhm.
And kind of like how we talk about unicorn horn, it's hard to maximize that because in the moment where it's triggered, you're running scared. A lot of times, Hourglass suffers from a similar problem. But it's also like if you look at those numbers, you compare those to the cooldown reduction in the game. Uh, it's it doesn't seem that good, but I want it to work. I guess we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think that this has an interesting potential. Maybe if there's more UI around it, maybe it could be better than we think it is. Nightmare Ichor and Nightmare Thorn. It's funny because I think that these used to seem really, really good to me, but now I value the cooldown more highly. And they just feel like worse Baylor's Eye because their effects are the same, except Baylor's Eye can be stacked and they're just one time and they're going to have a pretty significant impact on your duration. Um, yeah, and so their base effect is 5 times whatever the rare item equivalent would be, which is pretty good. I don't know. I think it'd be kind of cool if these were multiplicative, to be honest. If this was like a times two multiplier, it would be different from Baylor's Eye. It might be kind of cracked. Maybe you could make it 100% increased cooldown in that situation as a Punisher. Maybe that's too much. Maybe they're fine as they are. But I feel like right now, I don't love that they are basically worse Baylor's Eye.
I think where they work the best is in the builds that do, use your power and it's going to trigger a special or something like this, like Carmilla with
Mm,
injection. I think
yeah.
you can take this and use your power every once in a while when you really, really need it. But for the most part, you just buffed your special by taking Nightmare Thorn with injection, especially if you build into that with Flesh Rip and Sadism. You can be doing a lot with this. But normally, I'm very much like that as well. I won't want to take either of these unless I already have 2 to 3 cooldowns of whatever the respective ability is. Because as much as you are going to be doing uh, a lot more damage, say you miss that ability, or say you only use that ability on one enemy, and then by the time you would have had your power cooldown, there's another opportunity that you can hit like 5 enemies with, but you don't have your power cooldown, and then they spread out. So I think there's a lot of opportunity where it's like you really need to hold on to your ability and be like I just a lot more intentional with it when you take this.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
and I think just having sometimes a lot of these abilities are your ways to stagger an enemy, and you want them up more often to be able to stagger them. So
That's a good point too. Yeah, stagger's a resource, and if you're in co-op, the stagger bars are bigger. So there's situations where this extra damage might just mean that you're overall less able to stick to things. That's actually a downside of Baylor's Eye we didn't really talk about, because Baylor's Eye, you do lose some of, like, sometimes your special is your big stagger, and so maybe your Baylor's Eye is going to have situations where it doesn't let you knock an enemy down before you apply damage.
No, that's true. That is very true on that as well. Um, so we had this section, the build Pastec wanted.
Yes.
Do you want to? I'll let you go for that.
I can go for this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is kind of, and I don't know that we knew how like deep and passionate our feelings would be, but uh, there's interesting philosophy we see across items. And we've talked about some of these items already, but you look at things like Unicorn Horn, Father Time's Hourglass, Dragon Hide, Mad Hat, Mermaid Tears. Uh, I don't think we have. Yeah, those are probably the main ones. There's this idea that maybe if you keep your health pool lower than full, like you're trying to kind of play your game in the middle, there's a lot of benefits that could potentially come from it. And this is kind of interesting if you look at Father Time's Hourglass. So say you're 50% of your health, or 60, let's say 40%, so that we have the even 20% of health increments that Father Time Hourglass comes in. So you're running around at 40% of your base HP. Then you get 30% reduced cooldown on your power, special, and defense. That sounds like something that could be cool, except for the way that these abilities stack. As we've talked about, they're they seem to stack with diminishing returns. It's cutting off the same percentage off of a smaller pie each time. So, but it's funny because Pastec definitely has a lot of these things in the game that suggest that they want us to be trying to manage our health as a resource that yo-yos up and down, and yet in practice we don't really see that as a valid build path. It's really hard to pull off a situation where you can actually drop your health pool down really low and not just be a liability to yourself and to your run.
There is. Have you played Borderlands at all? Are you familiar with those games?
I have seen a little bit of lore and it looks like a great time, but I haven't made space for it yet.
So I think other Borderlands have this, but Borderlands 3 they have called Deathless Shields, I believe. And what it does is you have your shield in Borderlands, which regenerates over time. And like the speed of it regenerates over time. And then you have your health, which your health you need to pick up things to restore health or have abilities that restore health. There's a shield that sets your health at 1 HP. But it gives you like 50% more shield, and your shield becomes your resource, and you need to have basically like perks and stuff that will restore your shield or weapons that can restore your shield.
Mm.
And I would love a cursed in this game that basically does one of potentially two things. One is your maximum your maximum health is half of what it is, but you do, say 100% more damage. So it'd still be worth it stacking in vitality, but every vitality is now cut in half for what you're getting. So you can increase your pool, but it's always going to be 50%. That way, Father Time's Hourglass, that way, Dragonhide, like things like those can instantly be activated. Something like Unicorn Horn now has a lot more benefit in getting you there. And then or the idea potentially of doing that, of saying you have no vitality, you are at 1 vitality, but your health bar is now a shield. And probably give you an easier way of like picking up an orb can now restore shield, something like that. And then ways to restore shield can also restore your shield. I think something like that, like Mermaid Tears would now do nothing for you. Unicorn Horn, Queen of Hearts, those would do nothing for you. But something like Battle Crown, Beowulf, that's like everything to you. That's really important. But it could just make something like Father Time's Hourglass just instantly activated. You can even still go, if you wanted, Dragonhide and have the max armor from that and get the full benefit and get the 40% of its value as damage, even though the armor is doing. I mean, the armor would, I guess, still work with your shield, so it'd still be worth it.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Well, and it'd
Sorry,
be cool too because you could do things with Bloody Mary's Mirror, and that'd be an interesting synergy. By the way, sorry, I think I cut you off a little bit there.
Oh yeah, no, I was just making the point that I think the shield is affected by armor, but something like that where it's like you can now play a low health game, and again, like picking up a healing fountain would pretty much do nothing for you if your shield is really really low. Picking up a healing fountain, it's like that. No, it's not going to heal your shield anymore. I think something like that in the game, again, or the other variation of it would be really really cool, just to enable a lot of these things that you're talking about, where it seems like Pastec wants us to potentially have low health in some instances, and like how is that going to work for your gameplay?
Yeah, there's a game called Gunfire Reborn. It's a roguelike shooter. I played it a little bit. I think they've actually balanced and updated it a ton. I haven't checked that out, but there's a similar item in that game that you have shield and health in your character's kit. Basically, sets your health down to 0 or to 1, like you're talking about, and keeps your health separate, your shield separate. And when your shield breaks, your health will recover back to full. Um, and it's cool because it enables other items that scale off of having low health. And so I think that we have these concepts in a lot of different games. We have it in Borderlands. We have it in Gunfire Reborn. I'd love to see stuff like that in here. I think that these items incentivize this, and I like the idea of you enter a state in your game where you're almost berserk, right? You're playing the game in 2 times speed because you have all of your cooldowns all the time, but the burden of execution is quite high because you are more vulnerable. But
Mhm.
it's a cool, different change of pace, and there's an incentive for you to go low health. I think we've got stuff that's trending that way. Let's go ahead. Let's build on this idea. I like the direction. Let's bring in some new enablers to help us get to something that's viable.
Mhm. No, I think stuff like that, because again, that's like a entirely new playstyle that every character could adopt and like use in their kit. Say Carmilla. Well, actually, I don't even know if that would work with Carmilla because she she uses her health to drain for abilities. So maybe that wouldn't work with her. But I don't know. There's like every character could now benefit, especially from their shield talents in different ways, doing something like that. And I think it would be really really cool to see. And like again,
Yeah.
heals would be more impactful if say it wasn't the shield version. Say it was a your health's capped at like 50%. Heals would now become so much more important. Your armor would become a lot more important as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree. I think one of these days we ought to just like get together and like each have 3 mechanics or like game systems or ideas from other games that we think would have a place or be interesting to take and see a Ravenswatch spin on. Because I think there's a lot of interesting, creative things that you could do to build on this game, and I'm excited to see the direction of the game as time goes on as we start to build up. Like, can we add more items, or do we just like have items that come into the pool and leave the pool? Or do we want to give a whole bunch of attribute boosts in our items, or do we go more toward like super effect, like to certain effects like regen, vulnerable, strength? There's so much room for creativity,
mhm.
and I think the game can just keep getting better, and there can be a lot of replayability and a long future for the game.
uh, I see this missed opportunities that you wrote that Unicorn Horn does not work with Geppetto's dummies and Goldilocks
Oh yeah,
Porridge doesn't work with them. I was so sad to find out Goldilocks Porridge doesn't give dummy strength.
yeah, no, I think dummies. It's funny because as time has gone on, dummies are picking up more and more of the things that Geppetto does. Geppetto reminds me an awful lot of Engineer in Risk of Rain 2, because Engineer has these turrets he drops. They share all the effects of all of his items, and he's a very campy play style, and a lot of people hate him for that. But he's pretty good, and he is fun if you enjoy him. And I think Geppetto is kind of in a similar category where it can be tricky to understand how to make him work, but it's also so sad when he has effects that are locked. Like there are things that are locked behind the doll's character card, if you will, and the player's character card, like the scoundrel, the dummy, and Geppetto. I feel like you should just make them all shared. Make we already have that with Morning Rage. So why not just go across the board and have the rest on as well? Although there could be liabilities there too, like negative status effects applied to dummies now affect Geppetto. Might not be as much fun.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is cool that they added Black Lotus. Why not Mad Hat?
Yeah,
Why not Mad Hat?
yeah, yeah. Oh
That
my
might be too
goodness,
much.
that would be so busted. That would be. But you know what? If we change Leprechaun Coin, I'm down. Let's try it. Like
Yeah.
I feel so. Yeah, Mad Hat is one of those items that it doesn't work in the game right now. It's another one that incentivizes taking damage, and maybe there's a future there, right? There's if other things in the game economy were not so lenient, so that you could pretty much have infinite money all the time. I think that Mad Hat becomes an interesting conversation piece again, but it isn't right now.
I think Mad Hat is less important now that Vitality was kind of nerfed with Horn of Plenty. But I still think even back then, if you have 1,000 health with Horn of Plenty and you stand there and take almost 100 or almost all of your health, you made 100 Dream Shards. Like, how worth it was that? I understand throughout the
Yeah,
entirety of a run, but also like how worth it was it over just something else? I don't know. Mad Hat's an interesting one that I don't know what it did before. I forget what it did before. Oh, I remember what it did before. It was terrible. you lost dream shards instead of health when you took.
Oh my goodness. I forgot. I had blocked that from my mind. Losing
Yeah,
dream shards.
it was never a
I,
take.
well, you remember old golden egg, right? Old golden egg was the more dream shards you kept, it just gave you damage,
Hmm.
right? And I think that those are hard to balance and to make interesting because part of the interesting thing about the game is picking up new items and new talents and like studying the build. And if you make something really good, that the whole concept is tied up in this idea of I am not going to spend my money. I'm not going to manage the in-game economy. I'm not really playing around the like this whole host of things that are in the game to make it interesting and varied. If you make that thing good, then it just kills diversity. So it's kind of a problem from a game design perspective to have something like that in the game. um, but so yeah, I think that getting rid of that in Golden Egg and getting rid of that in Old Mad Hat is good for the game. I think that the current iteration of Mad Hat though could probably be bigger numbers if there weren't other things in the game that were so questionable.
Mad Hat is one that if they want to do something completely different with, I hope it is Mad Hat. I also think what you said with Golden Egg, where it was the you hold on to money and you do more damage. I don't know if you play Curse of the Dead Gods. That actually it was one of the strongest things in the game. It's like the Sapphire Amulet. You hold on to your money and you get a lot of damage from it, and it was one of the best ways to get damage. So you just and the game had weird ways of making money like through different abilities.
Mhm.
But that was the meta of the game, was make a whole lot of money and never spend it, and you just obliterate everything. So I'm happy that they saw that in Curse of the Dead Gods and decided to change how Golden Egg worked.
That's funny because I did not know actually know that, but it's so rewarding to have my completely random guess be validated in this one very particular instance. And it basically, I'm gonna go write that in my journal. It's gonna be on my tombstone probably that I guess that right. But yeah,
Basically a
no,
game dev, so you're in a good start.
basically, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I slow down videos and I watch them, and that makes me as smart as the people who made the thing that I'm watching.
Essentially, maybe even more so. Um,
Exactly.
and then the last thing we actually had, this has been a long video. Maybe it is just a podcast. I don't know.
Maybe it is.
We have just the weird stuff to talk about, and this is only like two different things. One is lightning with Vajra and Thunderstone, and I guess Geppetto in a way. Um, that lightning goes through armor. It
Yeah,
just
I need to slow this down and look at this. This one, I've seen so much about this, and I remember when I took my Geppetto and I had Vajra, it didn't feel that crazy to me, but then I see some things. It's one of those things that every now and then, like I turn fast enough that I think I see my shadow before it gets behind me again. Right? It's
mhm.
kind of one of those things where that I don't understand how this one works, but like there, it has edges on it that seem like okay, this may be much bigger deal than I thought it was.
Mhm. Yeah, I had I think over 600 something hours before I knew that. And I mean, again, it became very apparent when they did the Thunderstone change, and because again, I didn't really use Vajra for the Lightning Strike because it's not a targeted Lightning Strike, and I saw it a lot more with Thunderstone, and just there'd be a camp of three knights all standing right next to each other, and I use a special, and they all die, and I went, what just happened in my game?
What does is it? So I know that you like Geppetto has lightning in his kit as well, but is it the same kind of lightning or is it just the same visual and then the damage comes from somewhere else? I don't know that personally.
I do believe that when he has lightning rod dummies, I think lightning rod
Yeah.
dummies is the same source of lightning where that comes and it strikes down. I'm not entirely sure on forked lightning and laser lenses. I have a feeling that I mean forked lightning has a lower damage number. It just looks really big when you have the four dummies out and you're able to zap something on the opposite side of them. I think laser
Right.
lenses also passes the armor because laser lenses will hit something like a spider that's not knocked down and just delete it. And I'm like, what just
I've
happened there?
I've been confused before. I've seen laser lenses do things and I'm like, oh, that doesn't. I've seen those percentages before, and those percentages don't look that way on other characters. So
Hmm.
that's an interesting one.
I think laser lenses is doing that passing. Vajra, I normally whenever I do a dash build, there's not a lot of dash builds that I actually take Vajra. I take it in the Scarlet dash build because I'm normally going double strike and Fan of Spikes and just dashing through an enemy uh, is beneficial with Fan of Spikes, and then you can get the double strike hit right after it. Uh, Beowulf Fiery Slash, I think it's also very worth it because Beowulf is really good with Ring of Dispel. But there's like, Pied Piper that doesn't really need it as much. Aladdin, I honestly don't feel like I take Vajra that much because I feel like Aladdin has pretty good stagger, and I normally take Vajra for stagger. But
Yeah.
The lightning strike at that, again, it's just not a targeted location, but for the most part, if you're dashing through an enemy, uh, they are going to be hit by this lightning strike. It feels underwhelming, probably because it's not 3 lightning strikes like the special is getting, and I think, again, I'm pretty sure the special is getting the benefits from uh, Jack and Diamonds, the lightning strikes there,
Mhm.
where I think the Vajra one would only get the benefit from your flat damage number.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually yeah. I remember you mentioned that before, and that's one of the things that tends to hold these special abilities back, like trait damage or defense damage, things like that. Don't tend to scale very well just because you can't just stack, Jack of Diamonds or throw Baylor's Eye out and get a whole bunch of extra from it. But if that's uh if that's in play with Thunderstone, then that could explain a lot. The thing is, the Thunderstone builds I've been playing are already feeling so good that I haven't even really gotten to think about too hard what's happening with the lightning in the equation,
Yeah,
and so that's a knowledge gap that I need to fill. That
you
sounds Thunderstone is a cool. It's funny because Flaming Pearl, Thunderstone, and Outerstone they all seem the same, but Thunderstone is clearly like the one. You see it, and it just good endorphins in your brain.
exactly. No, yeah, the lightning is amazing. You do need to be pretty close in general for the lightning to work. Like I've noticed when I did my Aladdin Baylor's Eye special build, and I'm standing at a distance throwing the blades, the lightning isn't hitting enemies. Like you need to be around the enemies.
Oh,
So it
well, in
is,
that case, that would make sense because I was doing with Scarlet and Distant Explosion, so I was probably in Zimbabwe, so that's why I never really thought the lightning was a factor.
yeah, and that could be the case there. And then the last thing we just had here was Flaming Pearls. I do like that they changed the super effect that we get a thing of damage or something that isn't just here's other charges. Um, this, in my mind, right off the bat, it's the best on Piper because he has Freezing Trap and can guarantee 2 negative status effects. Some characters like Geppetto only have 1 status effect
Yeah,
on Rocket Science, so it feels bad. But in co-op, I have been doing streams a lot, and I noticed in a lot of boss fights, there's a lot of icons near that boss's health bar. So I'm like, okay, this is beneficial if you're playing co-op.
yeah.
That's probably at 45% in most runs at least, and sometimes 60 to 75%.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I'm curious about how the numbers work under the hood because it says it's 15% for each negative status they have. I'm not sure when I read this if this is being applied as a vulnerable or a marked, a damage amplifier, because those 15% are pretty significant. Whereas if it's being applied, if that's the analogous to, the 20 damage from a Jack of Diamonds, right? So slightly less than that. At that point, it's not as good in co-op situations. I think it holds up pretty well. But like, would I take this on a Scarlet when I have armor break and on the hunt, and potentially maybe I take evisceration so I can apply a bleed to something. That's all kinds of weird too because then you have to apply the bleed and then you have to be able to attack again. But like if it is a status effect amplifier like a damage amplifier, then maybe this is pretty good. I would need to test it out and to have a more informed opinion.
Yeah, Scarlet can actually be a pretty because the what is it? The Devour build doesn't really have a lot of things that synergize with power,
No,
and getting that up. So I think something like Scarlet with On the Hunt, with Pyromania, with Armor Break, and with Evisceration, if you can hit. I mean, I know you need to hit the power to have a bleed on it, but there's potential there for 60%. Throw your special, pop your defense, hit 2 powers back to back. I mean,
yeah.
there's some potential for a Devourer build there. I mean, honestly, I'm gonna have to do the last Scarlet Challenge run I'm gonna have to do is Devourer, and I'm so terrified of that. Maybe that's the route I go.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because you basically be playing out of Devour. You'd be playing Devour just to play Devour and then not touch it again, but like I don't know. It's interesting. I have to take another look at this one. I've been curious about it ever since I've been trying to figure out how to model this. I I think this one could potentially be like on almost like maybe I don't know if S tier is justifiable, but like situationally it could be really really good. But it all depends on where these numbers are coming from. Because if this is like 60 damage instead, like because if you have four status effects, so this is plus 60 damage, then that's really good early, but you won't have it early. It's good late, but it's not necessarily like world beating. Particularly when you have things like Excalibur hanging out in the shop somewhere quietly, or a status effect. Maybe like you get a late on the hunt and you haven't had that before. You're getting your first marked value. I don't know. Although I think Carmilla, her power build in a co-op run seems like a really great candidate for something like this because she's hopefully everyone else is taking aggro and you just get to throw this out here. That could be pretty cool.
No, yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree on that. Carmilla, actually, I at first was like, why would you ever take 2 power charges on Carmilla? You set up one big power charge and then you just do that. But there's a lot of times where an enemy's about to like poke you with a stick and you're like, okay, I need to move over here. And then you can set it up. So I think that actually is a pretty cool candidate for Carmilla, especially in co-op.
Yeah, or especially, but then obviously, like the coolest thing is if you get it to set up safely and you have Bader's Eye, and then it's like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, getting all the extra from that could be insane.
But yeah, that's our items and builds. All of these are well considered and scientifically proven opinions and facts. They should be taken as scripture. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with that.
So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Hopefully this is a fun conversation. If you have thoughts and opinions on whatever we're talking, make sure to put them in the comments. This is why we did this, is for the discussion of this. Um, but yeah, anything else you got to say?
No, that's it. This has been fun. It's fun to come on, and hope you guys enjoy this and inform us and tell us about the things that we don't know about these items because there's a lot to explore. And I think that we enjoy learning, and we like to show you guys what we know, and we also like to hear what you guys have to share with us and inform our builds. So
Yeah,
I think that's it.
and go check out Fabrizio's channel for other Ravenswatch content and like the other parts of this as well.